Okay, good afternoon. We're gonna call to order the special meeting of the Pacific Grove School Board. It's Friday, April 28th. I'm now gonna read a land acknowledgement. Good afternoon. As we begin this meeting, it's important to pay respect and to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Ohlone, Costanoan, and Esselen people, and additionally pay respect to elders, both past and present. Roll call, Mandy? Here.
Dr. Hazen.
Here.
Trustee Otmar.
Here. He's walking in as you say his name.
And I think,
So just as a point of order, do I need to read the remote speaker announcements at this time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I would like to announce for the record that this meeting is being conducted pursuant to California Government Code Section 54953, Section B, concerning teleconferencing of meetings. Board member President Carolyn Swanson is participating in this meeting by speakerphone from Best Western Plus Ocean View Resort, 414 North Prom, Seaside, Oregon, 97138. In accordance with the Brown Act, this location has been identified on the agenda for this meeting. I would now like to ask Board Member President Swanson to respond to the following questions. Are you able to hear our proceedings on this end?
I am, however, I am not at that address, so I'll be participating as a member of the public until I reach that address, and then I will notify you all and we can continue this disclaimer.
Sounds good. Okay, I will not continue with that at this time. Okay, moving on to the adoption of the agenda. This afternoon, we have only one item on our agenda for action discussion, and that is our governance discussion facilitated by William Tunick of DWK Attorneys at Law. Are there any board questions or comments about the agenda?
Not at this time, no.
Is there any public comment on the agenda? Okay, then we'll need a motion to adopt the agenda for a meeting. Anyone?
I move to adopt the agenda.
In a second?
I'm happy to second.
Okay, motion made by trustee Otmar, seconded by trustee Dr. Hazen. Can we do, we're not doing roll call or are we?
You don't need to.
Perfect. Can we get a vote then, Mandy?
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, so it passes 4 in favor and none opposed. We will now move on to our one agenda item, and that's our governance discussion. And at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Tunick. And also thank you for coming down to be here in person. It's really awesome to meet you and to get started. So, thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. The nice benefit of this job is actually getting out and getting to meet people in person and talk to boards. So just real quickly, I know we're going to spend a few hours today together. I think, I don't know if the board president kind of gave you an intro. My name is, mentioned William Tunick. I'm with DWK. Probably heard we're an ed law firm. I know you've worked with several. And what I mostly do in my work is work on governance issues and work with boards. So I've been doing it, well, actually much more than a decade at this point. And so, you know, I've done a lot of presentations where we sit and talk about the Brown Act for 3 hours. Yeah, we're not going to do that. And and the ed code, and there's all kinds of other provisions of law, right, that we spend all day thinking about. But I've also realized that as much of how boards work is about governance, right? The law is there, we have to follow it, but it's about being a governance team and working together. And when that in districts where you see that are productive and healthy, you can see that relationship working very well. And so I think what we want to do today is talk about what that means, what that means specifically for this board, because and this team, because it means something different for every district that I work in. And so we want to talk a lot about that. I know that this is a relatively new board. As far as we have new board membership, new composition. And I think that that's an opportunity for the board to kind of figure out who it is and how you all work together. And that's probably the dynamic anytime you work in a group of people. I think it takes probably 6 months to a year to kind of all understand how each other works, what contributions you can all make to the process, and kind of how you're going to function as a group and kind of get that collective going. So hopefully we can start that process today. This is not a one and done situation by any means. I think everybody knows that, but I did see, and I appreciate everybody who responded as far as kind of some of the pre-workshop questions I sent around. I did see a lot of hope and optimism about there being an opportunity and start this dialogue. A lot of times boards honestly don't have time to sit and talk to each other about how they want to work together, because you're always being, you've got agenda of 5 or 6 substantive items, and there's not time to stop and talk about, okay, how do we really work together for the good of the students? And instead it's we got these 3 things or 4 things we've got to work on. So that's what today is all about. My goal is to talk as little as possible, which I know for an attorney is probably not something you hear very often. But what I want to do is, it's funny, when this was written, I think it was governance workshop by attorneys, and I tweaked it because I want to facilitate, right? I want to make this as much about the governance team talking to each other and asking questions with each other, and not so much me telling you should do it this way, you should do it that way. That's not going to help you. I think what helps boards is being able to hear from each other and come to that collective understanding about how you're going to move forward, how you're going to be productive together. So one thing that I did want to do at the very beginning to kind of kick that off, and I know I got a little bit of this feedback before, but was to kind of maybe go around and ask everyone, and maybe we'll follow up with the board president when she can join us, as far as what are your kind of expectations and objectives? What would you like to see happen in these next 3 hours that we have together? And see if we can all kind of get an understanding. I've got a sense of where I'd like to go with the agenda, but I also want to be flexible. And if the board team wants to talk about something else, we can pivot, we can talk about that. I want this to be about whatever's the most productive. So I don't know if I've got a volunteer who wants to start to go first as far as kind of what they're looking for today, or you can pick names out of a hat.
Sure.
Oh.
I'll do it. Yeah. I'll jump in. Sorry, mic off. I mean, I think for us as a collective, it's about the collective. For me, at least, it's like, how do we speak in one voice? Because and about the students, those are the 2 things. It's like, how do we speak and support the students? That is how I approach it, at least, is the number 1 thing. What do we do to support the students, and then the families and the community beyond that, and the teachers were, and classified and certified within that too. It's like, how do we support that also and respect them? I don't want to disrespect them, but it's really about the students and how do we elevate them, because that's our job mostly. So how do we do that? And how do we do that with one voice? And it feels like over the last few years, it's become difficult for a number of reasons. I mean, COVID did not help. And we've had issues within our district that have not helped that either. So how do we work through that and talk about these things that are difficult things without tearing each other apart also? So in the broadest sense, that's what I want to talk about tonight, is like, how do we deal with that? And it's weird and complicated, because when you look at the dais, right, it's like, you got 5 people here that are, and over this last year too, as we reorganized how we approach that too, even more complicated because the way people are elected too. I think that worked, that works for LA. It doesn't work for Pacific Grove necessarily, how we elect representatives. So that makes it complicated too. End of the day, how do we support our kids and parents and teachers and staff and the district and the community at large? How do we do that? And I don't know, but that's why I think we're talking about this right now tonight.
And just if I can add, I mean, it seems like kind of thinking like practical things as far as what we can tackle. I heard a couple of places in there, I think communication,
Mhm.
both with each other and with the community. I think that is fair to say that's a piece of what we're talking
For
about.
sure.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Anyone else want to volunteer?
I can go. I think for me, the value of this training is us all being on the same page at the end of it and all having the same ideas about what our communications protocols are amongst one another with admin, how we respond as a board or the board president responds to the number of emails that seem to be increasing that we receive from the community, and what that structure looks like. I would like us to touch on the Brown Act a little bit, because I think there has been some like I just want us all to be on the same page. And then I think more specifically, like what our role is as a board versus, and what our meetings are for. The purpose of board meetings.
Okay, and just on the, so the communication thing, I think,
Yeah,
the role piece, I feel like kind of
crosses.
crosses, I think we
Mhm.
can actually kind of start with that because
Totally.
that hits a couple things. But on the Brown Act piece, is that sort of linked to that communication serial meetings? Is that?
Yes,
That was my assumption. That's usually what boards have questions about. They're not totally fascinated
sure.
about the agenda notice requirements. So, maybe some people are, but anyway.
I'll be happy to go next. I think a lot of the points that I mentioned, communications was near the top for me. The big one I had is this, and you guys are going to be tired of me saying it at some point, but is this idea of a culture of we, is how do we as a board make sure that even when we disagree, we're operating as a board. There's no individuality in any decision that is made. And what I mean by that is not that there's no individuality, but there's no one person driving their voice above the voice of anyone else. I'll put it that way. But also, how do we make sure that our community feels part, including the students, staff, administrators, and teachers feel part of the district and feel ownership in the district? Because I think that's something which communications ties right back into, is if people don't feel they're hearing what they should, or they're hearing it in a way they understand, it can drive kind of a wedge or a chasm among things. The other one that I think I was going to say was just the PGUSD board goals have not been addressed by us as a group. So that was something that I thought was particularly important to me, that we go over it and make sure that what was written last time still stands for this board, or if there's specific items that might need to be revised. Up there.
Communication and the goals, those are the.
I don't want to get in your,
Oh, no.
not ready. Okay. For me, I feel what's most important for me to get out of this today, and maybe for the whole board and for everyone here, I would like to see us be able to operate as a cohesive unit, and a board that allows space for people to have opinion and ideas and not feel like they have to adjust how they feel about things for fear of, I don't know, repercussion. I want the community to feel the same way, that they can come to a board meeting and speak and be heard. And there's not eye rolling or chair shifting or anything like that. I want people to feel like, our community to feel like they can have a voice for their students, and that we're hearing them, and that we're hearing each other, and that we're all coming together as a cohesive team to better this district and to elevate our students. And I would also really like to look at board goals as well.
Do you think that as far as that cohesive, is that, I mean, I'm not, if it's not in the same box, I want to make sure we don't put it in that box. Is that also kind of a communication thing, do you think, as well? Or it's probably more than that, it sounds like.
Yes, it's included for sure. A communication, yes, communication with the community and with parents and staff, but also with each other.
Yeah.
Open session, closed session. I think it's important that we all feel that we have the space to speak, no matter where we're at, board or community.
So that may be as much about how maybe it's how communication happens is, and not in a nuts and bolts kind of way, but in a like kind of the space that's created and the air that's given. I guess.
That's, yes, absolutely, the air that's given. And the idea that people can sometimes misspeak. They may want to get a point across, and maybe the point's coming across unclear because people are not comfortable with speaking in public. And when people come up to the podium and they're talking to us, it's difficult. Public speaking, I mean, I don't like public speaking either, but here I am because it's something that I feel needs to be done. So I want to make this a space where people feel comfortable that they can communicate with us, because if it's not that space, we're not going to hear what we need to hear. And I don't want anyone to feel like they can't be heard on the board and from the community, both.
I'm so glad that you said that too. It's like making this place where we are right now, or our meetings, a safe place for people to speak
Mhm.
about, and saying things that maybe you didn't intend to say, or maybe you said it, or you could say in a better way. It's
And
like,
nope,
but
yeah.
opening that forum for people, whether it's the board or the people in public too, to just like, it's like, I would, if I had a preference when somebody comes up to speak, whether they misspoke or didn't speak, I'd rather they speak.
Mhm.
Right. And then we can figure out what you meant to say. But I would rather have a community voice or a voice from the board, and then we can figure out what you meant to say rather than, oh, that was perfect.
Yeah, no one's perfect.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that. Thank
You know,
you. It's,
yeah.
I think that's really important to acknowledge that too. It's like, because yeah, we are imperfect and we're just trying to do the best that we can here. And sometimes you don't have the best words for what we're doing. So, but to have involvement, and and that's one of the things that I really think is important, is like, how do we engage the community? Because it is a community, and how do we bring everybody in, as many players as they want to be in? It's like, bring everybody in with their faults and warts and all that stuff. It's just like, let's get people talking about what we want to do. And it's not going to always be pretty.
Right. And I say essentially, I mean, truly, we're all here for the same purpose.
Yes.
There's not one of us that's sitting here thinking that we're pushing some big agenda. I think the only agenda we're all pushing is to elevate our students and to make sure our students are safe and emotionally supported and can move on to the career that they choose for themselves for happiness. So, I mean, I think if we all keep a clear idea of where we're going and why we're here, I think it's really helpful, you know.
And if I could add just one, because you reminded me, Brian, in the comment to Laura, the one issue that made me think of is, regarding for the kids, is we all have limited time, and whether it's the board, whether it's the staff, whether it's the teachers, whether it's our students in the district. So how do we prioritize that to maximize the effect and the intent that we want? Because that's something that I feel, worried about, is that we can very easily say we want to do 30 things and accomplish 0, versus saying we want to do these 3 things and accomplish them all. And that's something I think as a board we need to be, and I agree with 100% with the way you stated. We can be in difference of opinion, but we have to come together to make sure we're, at least in unity on pushing forward for the kids. I agree.
I think I was just kind of taking some notes because I try to figure out which bucket those fit in, because and I'll probably kind of push everyone on this today. That's what I like to do anyway, is and even in the feedback, like I think there's some things here that everybody kind of just knows off, like you were saying, like everybody wants to be here. We're all here for the same purpose. We all want to work together. I think both boards want to have a safe space, feel like they're getting community input. And we could talk about that for 3 hours and I'll go home and feel good, I guess. But like trying to figure out, okay, so what does that actually mean? Right. Because I feel like a lot of boards, they start to have that conversation, and then the first tricky issue that comes to the board, that starts to fall apart immediately. Right. It was like, well, it sounded good during the retreat, and then we got to something difficult, and that governance, all those things we talked about started to fall apart. So I think trying to take that to to practical things. Like, what does that mean as far as when we're in a board meeting, we're gonna do A, B, C, and D, or when we get an email from the community, we're gonna do A, B, C, and D. Like, those are that's why I want to try to push today to come up with those kind of specifics. And you've got in your handbook, you've got norms and protocols. Actually, I think the protocols are kind of more Brown Act-y than the norms are, but looking at some of those and, making sure that those are where the board still is, number one. And if they are, talking about how do those actually, is there a commitment to follow those going forward, right? Because I think that's the tricky piece. But I did want to also hear from superintendent and other assistant, if you had thoughts on what you would like to see or what you would think would be good to see during the meeting.
Actually, I'm deferring to the board and the conversation is the opportunity for the board to talk, but I really appreciate everything that's been brought up. I think that the theme of communication has come up quite a bit in a lot of our board meetings. And so I think that's always a great conversation to have, because it's just always tricky at best. And trying to find that common ground around that theme is really important, I think, just for any board and certainly for staff, so that we know coming away from board meetings, we have a clear picture of what's being asked and the direction that we're being asked to go, so that we can in turn communicate clearly to our group. But I really want to defer to the conversation right now. So thank you.
I mean, I say this a lot and often, and it's been said here today. Everything we do is, and every decision we make is a direct line to the students, no matter what it is. It might be new toilet paper in the bathrooms. Every single thing that we do is a direct line to the students and all students. So sometimes there's decisions made by administration and by boards that are taking into consideration only some students and not others, and we need to weigh out the impact. I think how important it is that it may be a positive impact for some, but it may be a negative impact to others. And I think if we just keep focus on that, what is best for all and how we draw a direct line to the students, I think that we're all doing the right thing here.
I know, and hopefully when the board president joins, hopefully she can weigh in on this as well. But I think, okay, so I think what I'm hearing is kind of what I got back in the feedback as well is, and I had put it in 3 buckets, which is one, talking about what the role of the board versus staff is. And this was, I think, was in the agenda too. Communication is a big piece. And then if we ironically, if we get to meeting efficiency and effectiveness, that would probably be the third thing, which is a lot for 3 hours. I do want to though note, I mean, I also heard the comments about looking at the goals and, maybe even like a district mission, that type of stuff. I think that that's probably something that is a good idea, but maybe something that it's probably bigger than what we can get to today. Even though it's an important thing to do. So, but I did want to acknowledge that because I know that that's another an area. So I wanted to move in, I think the first big topic. Oh, and the other thing I was going to mention is we can go as far as whatever the board wants, if we want to take a break at some point. 3 hours, maybe a long straight shot, but to get into it on the role piece. And just the one preface I wanted to add before, because I've got some questions as far as what the board, what you feel that your role is, staff's role. I want to talk about things that you see as not being the role of the board, kind of turn that question around a little bit. What are things that are clearly in staff's purview that are not in the board's purview, or the other way around? Because I think that might be a little bit easier to illuminate than when we ask the question, what's the board's role? I think so we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think, again, I just want to keep kind of coming back on this preface, which is trying to get to either norms or protocols or agreements with the board about, in practicality, what does this look like as a board? How are you going to function? So you'll hear me keep coming back to that a lot, and to just kind of give you a little spoiler where I go with that, which is it's thinking not only am I going to be able to agree today that this is the norm or the protocol, but when it gets to a place where, I run up against that norm or protocol and maybe it's not the most easy, not the most convenient way to do something, or not really what I want to do, but this is the norm and that's what everyone else has agreed to, being able to abide by it at that point. Because I think when I work with boards, even where everybody doesn't agree on policy, which can happen, like everyone doesn't have to have the same policy viewpoint. You don't all have to be best friends. As a matter of fact, from a Brown Act perspective, we kind of prefer that you're not usually. So we've actually had either married couples or folks living together on boards, and so from a Brown Act perspective, that's always a little like, well, sorry, you can't talk to anybody else. So, but I think what I've noticed is where everybody is not only playing by the same rules essentially, but sees the other board members doing that. I think that's where that shared understanding and that trust really starts to get built between the board members, because they understand that even if they may not agree with somebody, that everyone's on the same playing field. We're all here for the same reason. We're all doing what we're doing the same way. And the board's going to make its decision at the end of the day. But there's that commitment to follow the same rules. When boards stop doing that and you get 5 board members kind of doing their own thing, I think that's really where it gets really tricky to work as a team for obvious reasons. So, like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit or start with what is the roles of the board and staff, because I think that'll lead us into the communication piece and even the meeting, obviously. So I'll throw the softball out there. We could start with this one, which is how would you describe the role of the board? I guess it's kind of a softball question, but we'll start there and then maybe turn that one on its head and what isn't the role of the board.
We are policymakers. The inverse is staff are the kind of boots on the ground implementers of the policy. So they're responsible for the day-to-day implementation of our policies. We provide public oversight and accountability for the budget. We are interfacers with the community. We are responsible for engaging with the community and seeking input from the community. Yeah, at a high level, that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I agree completely with what was said there. The only thing I might add, I mean, coming back to the kids again, it's just that, we are an advocate for the district, I would say, and for the kids. And I don't mean an advocate on the ground way, but I'll give you an answer to your second question, but like if I was constantly going to the press talking about how horrible the school board was, I think that would be something that would, or not the school board, sorry, this district was, that would be an example of something I think a board member should not be doing.
Well, so actually, let me ask you a question then. So what about if an individual board member is going to the press and talking about how great the school district is? Is that a board rule?
I would love, after we've had our communications discussion, to give another answer at that, but
Little
my-
preview?
my view would be if that is the view of the board as a whole, I'm fully in support of it. If it is their view about the district, or they're giving it as a personal statement, I'm okay with it. But if they're giving it as a board member and it's not the view of the entire board, then I would be a bit concerned.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the
No,
spot,
no,
by the
it's
way,
great.
but that's like, because I think those are some of those areas. And actually I was gonna ask, so I think, well, actually, I'm gonna come back. You mentioned interfacing with the community or kind of communicating with the community. And I guess this is coming back to that communication piece.
Sure.
What is, maybe I talk a little bit more about that, because I'm trying to, I think that may lead us into some of the communication questions about what
Sure.
is the board's role to be out there and finding out what's going on? Is it to be trying to, help members of the public that have concerns? Like,
Mhm.
what is that?
So for me, I guess I wear 2 hats. I'm a parent and I'm a school board member. So I'm not necessarily out looking for conversation or issues, but concerns or praise, because I wear both hats, tend to be brought when I'm on a campus. I think as far as emails go, because that's a big one for me as far as communications that come in from staff or community members. I would love us to have a more specific protocol around that. I think what we've discussed briefly was the board president and the superintendent crafting a response, noticing the volume of emails that we get, and how many responses have to go out from the board president. I don't know if that's the best system. I'd love for her to weigh in on that. I also think something that's valuable for me when I am out in the community or at a school site is having talking points. One example is the rollout of the transitional kindergarten program that's coming up. And this week we got an email that said, hey, here's the status. Here's what's going on for both sites. Here's a link to share with families that's coming up. And for me, if I'm out and I have that information, then I can be on the same page as staff and admin, and I have accurate information that I'm sharing. So. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, you know, and I know we've got three of you that were, well, recently ran for election too. One thing that I've noticed with boards, especially in the, I guess it's the spring of the odd years, it seems like, when new board members that come on are probably, I've sensed could sometimes still be not in campaign mode in that they're trying to win an election at that moment, but I feel like a campaign is all about, you know, as much individual responsiveness and being out there in the community and being an advocate for why you want someone to elect you, right? Which is a very individual thing. And then to go from that to the opposite and being on a board where a lot of the norms and the protocols that we talk about kind of shift that dynamic, I think, right? And suddenly it's not the focus. I think I heard someone say, you know, the we focus, right? We go from I to we. And I think that can sometimes take a few months or maybe longer to transition over. And especially for folks, you know, they've built all these great relationships during that process. And then to be able to say, well, now I'm part of the board. So, you know, we have to work through that process. And if there's three board members that want to do something, that's great. You know, if we don't have that right now, maybe we'll come back and we'll talk about it later. So I think that may be a challenge sometimes. I've seen that in other districts.
Just a quick one on the engagement piece I wanted to throw out there is that I do also view there's a role for us to play in pointing people the right direction because we are there.
Mhm.
And the second part of that, and this is one I'd love to throw out there because I could be shot down on this one, is that I do think there's an important role the board plays when parents feel the administration has not met their needs. And so it's not that if, you know, someone has an issue with their teacher and they come to me, I'm going to say you need to, well, if they come just to me, I would say you need to talk to your teacher about that. But if it's a situation where they feel like they've gone through the whole chain and they still aren't being heard, then that to me is a role of the board to be able to say, you know, make sure everyone on the board's aware of it and maybe it gets agendized and something that, you know, gets addressed if it is something that is an issue that could affect all kids, not just, you know, one situation thing.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to our role in the oversight, the chain of oversight. It's you like start with your site remedy and then you go up through the chain of command. And if that doesn't work, then you notify the board, right? I mean, in my head, that's kind of our job too. If we get an email and we're like, hey, did you talk to the teacher? You know, and so they can learn and understand and learn how to advocate better for themselves and their students next time they come forward.
Yeah, because I did to that point. I mean, you know, I realize that, and so many of you being parents, it helps too. But I think that sometimes just living in this world, like even understanding who the right person is to go to talk to, like we might all know, but 90% of parents, 95% of parents may have no idea. And just, but I think, that goes both ways. We'll talk about communication. I think you can also sometimes train folks to do it the wrong way, as much as you're training them to do it the right way. So when that redirection is happening or you're getting the right information, that's great. When some of these norms aren't being followed, then it reinforces the behavior with members of the public, especially in parents. And then it's harder to unwind that, I think, because it creates an expectation. And anyway, I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to stop talking. Is there something, I guess maybe we were talking about kind of the role of staff versus board. Is there something, and maybe this is a question both for staff and the board, but things that are helpful, and maybe I'll start with staff, but that the board can do that make it easier for you to do your job. And I might ask the other way around too, just from a, you know, as far as what their role is, something that's helpful that then makes it easier for staff to implement what those decisions are.
I think, well, speaking for myself, and I think I mentioned it before, it's just that idea of clarity. Sometimes, you know, board meetings can be long and they can get very detailed and you sort of sometimes can lose your place in there and as just part of the dialogue. And so we oftentimes try to kind of circle it back to, okay, so where are we? Where do we land? Where do we want to go? What do you need us to do? And for staff, I think, again, it comes back to that, you know, let us know clearly kind of where you want us to go next and kind of the space to be able to ask questions and make sure we have the right information so that we can proceed. Because our primary job for both of us is to make sure that we're addressing the needs that the board has asked us to address in the scope of the board meeting. So that clarity is really important. And I understand that sometimes in the scope of conversations, the landing hasn't quite happened yet. And it's okay to say, all right, that we're still in discussion. We'll come back around to it another time. So that's important, I think, for us just to know. And then also, I think the other piece too is to when there are needs for mid-level managers at the high school, for the high school principal, for example, or something like that, to again kind of direct that our way so that we can balance what those needs are, because we may have given assignments to some of the managers that the board is not aware of, and so before we add more to the plate, to be able to kind of sort of sift that out a little bit and then follow the direction. That's one thing that comes to mind, I think.
Promise I'll try not to talk as much, but I have a question back at you if it's okay, Superintendent
Sure.
Flores, on that, in that, is there do you feel there's a mechanism for you to be able to tell us as a board when we are not doing that well? And I'm thinking particularly the second part,
Mhm.
like if I'm going and talking to a principal and I'm doing it because we were doing something, you know, and I'm giving him direction that conflicts. I mean, you're put in a very tough spot as the employee of the board, but I mean, for the communication side, that's something I think is really important for us. So I'd love to either hear your thoughts now or maybe later if it's better.
Well, I think when the board created the governance handbook, the draft a couple of years back, I think that very dialogue happened. And I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was really more of that we were talking about, here are the protocols in regards to not giving direction to other staff, come to the superintendent so that we can address that. And everyone agreed that's the direction we go. And that's the most help, when you know the protocols are and you follow them, because ultimately every administrator in this district I know are going to do their very best to do whatever it is you ask of them. They want to get it done. They're pleased to do it. And so they'll give me a call and say, hey, you know, Dr. Hazen asked me to do this. Where do you want me to go with it? How do you want me to do it? And I'll say, well, let's get it done and work on it. But the hope is that previous to that, you've talked to me so we can kind of parse that out. And if not, obviously we'll do what we can do. But during board meetings, for sure, I think I've really appreciated the open dialogue that we have had, and the space for staff to be able to clarify with the board and speak up and interrupt from time to time. I know that doesn't happen at a lot of board meetings where staff and you just kind of are quiet, and I've appreciated the space for us to be able to have that dialogue with the board when it's necessary. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything that was just said. I would just say that, and this board is actually very good at this, you know, understanding that the administration is, you know, we're a small administration, we're a relatively small district. So like, you know, always thinking about like what bandwidth is available for implementation of certain projects. And of course, if all of us, you know, are on the same page with the administration and aligned with the board on their goals, we know when we're discussing new projects or new items moving forward, we know kind of how to align those with our day-to-day activities and how to delegate outward. But again, with, you know, keeping in mind that we are a small district and we're limited in time, and this board's been very good about doing this. There's been a lot of discussion about this. You know, one more thing for administration that they need to take on, and being mindful of that is very important, I think, because we are small.
Can I ask a question? In terms of just like the logistics of what that looks like, us not putting too much on staff's plate and staff feeling comfortable giving feedback, do we have like a system that works for everyone as far as like, you know, you'll say like, hey, we have a new idea. Is that too much for staff? Does staff feel comfortable saying, yeah, that's too much for this year, but you know, it's a great idea and maybe next year we'll get to it? Like, are we kind of on the same page as far as that kind of feedback and dialogue? I'm sorry if I'm talking too much. Okay.
I'm not gonna.
I would admit right now that process is through at board meetings.
Okay.
Because that's, and again, I think that as long as we are able to have that mutual dialogue, we're able to respond. And I think when we hear something that we know we can't get to right away, I know from time to time I've said, we can't quite get to it yet, but give us some time, or when would you like that to happen?
Okay.
And again, I think the board's been very receptive to that. And I would encourage the board to continue doing that kind of being receptive that way, because that helps us a lot. And
Cool.
and we feel comfortable being able to speak up and say, yeah,
Okay.
that's happening. I think if any other process that would be needed would have to be something a lot more complicated. And I think right now the kind of organic nature of it at board meeting really helps.
Okay.
And as long as that dialogue doesn't happen away from a board meeting, you know, then it's great because we're able to have that response. Otherwise, we got to call everybody and
Sure.
circle back around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's helpful for me.
Do you have, I would just was wondering kind of to that point, do you have, if it was on the website, like a governance calendar as far as kind of what are the major things that are going to be coming to the board every part of the year kind of a thing. 'Cause I'm just,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, and so I'm just wondering, because I've seen some boards where, like one-off, like I've sat through meetings where there's been like, one thing at the beginning, one thing at the middle, one thing at the end, and by themselves, they don't sound like a lot for staff. And then after you go through about 3 meetings and you look at the list of the things that the board has asked staff to do, it starts to look like a lot, and then you add those to the governance calendar and so I've seen some boards do, either at the end of the meeting or maybe once every couple months, stop and take a look and say, okay, here's all the things that you asked, or here's what the board wanted to do and staff's priorities. These are the things we're going to be able to get to in the next couple months. These are the things that we're going to have to keep kind of continuing. Is the board good with where this is, so that a board member doesn't say, I thought we talked about something, I haven't seen it for 5 months. So that's something, and maybe you don't need it right now. Maybe it's organically, it's working, but I think that's something you could implement to kind of keep track of what the board as a whole has requested that staff do. Or maybe that staff or that the board discuss even sometimes. So that could be an option as well, if that starts to get a little bit unwieldy. But yeah, I think I know it, especially at board meetings, I feel like there's a sense of, oh, this is a good idea, we should get into this, we should start looking at that. And by the time everybody goes home that night, there's a list like this. Staff the next morning are like, okay, here's the, 13 things we talked about last night, never mind all the emails that came in while I was at the meeting. So any other thoughts though on, I think we were kind of talking about, well, I guess we were talking about sort of what, from the staff's perspective, what the role of the board, how that can be helpful for staff. What about maybe the other way around? I mean, I think from the board's role, from the board's perspective, the staff role, what can be helpful? I heard the talking point thing was something that I think I heard that can be helpful. Are there other things that you see being in the staff role that would be helpful for your job? And maybe there's a lot to that list, but.
I'll add quickly, because I mean, the talking points is that comes back to communications, but I do think it is useful for us to know what are the things we should be touting about the district when we are out in the community. I mean, I think that's a really useful thing to get. I would love to get more insight on that from everyone. The other part, actually, I'll just leave it at that for now.
I think, one of the things that as we move through all of this is because there are so many things that need to be done, right? It's like from dealing with our students to walking across campus and seeing it's like, oh, there's a tree down here. And it's like, this looks awful, right? Or this looks unsafe. It's like, how do we create a space for everybody to feel kind of safe to talk about these things too? That to me is important. I want people to feel like, it feels sometimes like when we're these meetings, it ends up always being talking about, it's like one crisis or another. It's like, or somebody's not being paid enough, or we need to, but I'm thinking about more of a holistic approach to things, and how do we make everybody feel open to talking about what's going on in our community. And I know that's kind of really malleable and weird and funky, but I want people to feel free and open to come and talk about these things that are happening in our community, because I want it to be a community too. I really want not just people. It's like, my kids are older now, right? They're not in school anymore. They're not here. And that's not why I'm on the board. It's not why I ever got on the board anyway. It's like, I want the board to be a really integral part of what happens in the community. And how do we do that? How do we connect with city council and parents and PTA and all the different things? So how do we do that? And that to me is one of the most important things about what we do. Is like, how do we integrate? And I don't know. I'm not sure. But, again, it's like, that's kind of a softball thing. It's like, I'm just going to throw it out there for somebody to catch it. But it's like, what do we do? How do we do this better? Because I think we really do have a great community here. One of the betters, I think, but it could even be that much better, even if we just like, how do we talk to each other? So I don't know. There you go. Do with that what you will.
Well, I guess I was gonna ask a question, because you were saying, how do, we integrate or we do this better? Is that the board or the district? I mean, it could be both, but, or even individual board members, because I guess that kind of goes back to that role question. Is it something that individual board members should be going out and doing? Is it something that, the board creates a safe space at the meeting, or is it the district doing that outreach? Maybe it's all of those things. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I feel like that's.
Well, that's a good question, right? Because it's like, I think for some of us who have kids that are actually in the district, it's like you're there right now, right? You're dropping off your kids, you're picking them up, you're working through help, through homework and all that stuff. And then for me, I'm the oldest. I know I'm the oldest board member here. It's like my kids are done with that. So we've gone through that and we've experienced that and we have that experience. But it's like, so how do we bring that and how does that work? How do we contribute to that? How do we listen to what we're hearing from parents? How do we bring that to the board? And ultimately, again, I'm so much about the board trying to speak as a board. I come back to that again and again and again. It's like, I want the board to be this unified thing that talks about stuff. And sometimes people don't know what we're talking about as a board. It's like we go behind we go into closed session and we deal with this or that, or we're thinking and are trying to figure out how we manage this. But we bring all these really different experiences to what is happening here, and they're all valuable, but I still want it to be a board thing. I don't want it to be, please, Elliot, help me here.
Well, no. Well, I have an example, I think, that ties into this, is that we recently were asked, this is district, but we were asked to meet with a group. If you remember,
Yes,
this is something that is completely, for me, is paralyzed me. You guys are hopefully all familiar with this email too. It was about,
Nope.
okay. We were asked, we were sent an email basically saying we would like to meet with you and discuss our role in the community, essentially. And this is one that's like over coffee. And I was thinking, this is something I want to do, but I don't know how to do it because of Brown Act, because of do we have to, I assume we have to agendize maybe a special session, or we nominate a committee of do it like 2 board members at a time. Like that's one of those things that to me is a way we can integrate, but we
Or
don't
is
have
it even our role, Elliot? Like, that's a question I have. Is it our role to meet with certain groups depending on their designation in the community? And I know the email you're referring to now, but I think my first question is like, should we even be entertained? What's the first step?
Yeah.
So I'm like,
This-
then
yeah.
my brain would say like, I'm not qualified to answer this. I'm going to give it to my subject matter expert, which is either the superintendent or maybe then legal.
Right.
Well, it would be a pretty quiet coffee because I couldn't speak on behalf of the board. So I would just be sitting sort of quietly listening because I wouldn't be comfortable, and I couldn't give my personal opinion because my personal opinion may not represent the other 4 members of the board. So meeting for coffee, we can have coffee here.
Yeah.
And
It's
I'm-
so hard. And I want to interject for just a second too, because it is, and we've all got those too. And I wish there were people here to hear this too, but it is so hard because we do get those. Sometimes it's a group email and sometimes it's just an email to one of us. It's like, I want to take a walk with you. And you're like, okay, but I don't speak for the board. We're trying to do this thing. And I don't think the public at large understands what we're doing or how this works. And even though we make our announcements every time before a meeting, it's like, the Brown Act and blah, 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 and we can't do this and that. But I don't think, I think most often the public, if somebody feels like we didn't address their, they got their 3 minutes at the podium and we thanked them for addressing whatever it was, I think they feel like they were dismissed because they don't understand what the restrictions are that we're facing. It's difficult. It's really, really difficult. I don't know how we get beyond that.
Well, and like I was saying, because I think you're I mean, board members, you're elected by the community, you're ultimately responsible to the community, you want to be responsive. And yet, you know, if you look at the norms or you read the Brown Act, a lot of what you're going to see in there is it's going to say don't, right? Don't do exactly what human nature would be when someone comes up and says, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something that I know you have something to do with and I can share some helpful information. You want to be like, well, of course, like let's
Sure.
fix this problem. And then you go read, you know, you pull out your handbook and we turn to page 7 and it says, you know, do not do exactly what you're about to do, right?
Yeah.
And even probably more complicated is, you know, if you're, especially if you're a parent in the district, or if it's somebody that you're friends with who's coming to you with those kind of concerns and being able to say, you know, I can't talk to you, or how do you negotiate that? So we can, I mean, we can just jump right into that because that's what, actually that I think the board president saw me spend an hour and a half talking about at CSBA last year was how to, those kind of email correspondence with members of the public and how to, you know, I think there's a way to be responsive, there's a way to listen, but there's also a way to let people know at the end of the day, like, I'm happy to hear what you have to say, but I'm one of 5 members of a board, and that's, and honestly, the best place to really bring your concerns is come to the board meeting. Like, we'd love to hear from you at the board meeting. Or, you know, an email in the entire board, not the best, but still maybe better than just reaching out to one, to be perfectly honest. But if you really don't feel comfortable and you want to, you know, want me just to listen to what you have to say and realize that I can't really kind of give you what you want, then we can sit down and I can listen. Now, there may be certain groups or certain times, you know, if someone's suing the district, and they say, we'd like to sit down with one of the board members and have a discussion about the case, probably one of those ones where you're going to be like, I don't think that's such a great plan. But if it's a
Yeah.
community member and or another parent, they've got a concern and you want to listen, I don't think we can tell board members you can't do that. I think
Well,
that's
I
probably
think that's
unrealistic.
part of why we're here too, is to listen. And that's part of what I was saying about giving people the space and making them comfortable that they have a voice and that we hear their voice. And yes, I might be one of 5, but I can still hear you. And if I explain to you that I can't solve your problem, but I can hear what you're saying. And so please don't stop talking. And if you know of other parents that are having the same issue, you know, you go through the chain of command, and if that hasn't worked, then please, like, let's hear about it. And I think that just keeping that open, and I mean, that also could be, I guess, a slippery slope, but that's why we're here. It's why we're here, time limited, but you know.
Yeah, but I think that, but it's also, it's about setting those expectations. It's not only, you know, I can't solve this. Like, I'm not here to solve this issue for you. You know, I want to listen, and if there's, but then also that redirection, because if a lot of times I think those emails are, I'm having a problem with fill in the blank, which is probably an administrative type issue. I think then being able to say, well, I'm happy to listen to you, but what I'm going to tell you to do is go talk to either usually the superintendent, maybe lower level, depending on what the issue is. And you need to go, that's the person that can help you. Like, I'm happy to listen, but that's where you're going to have to go for a solution. I'm not going to, you know, pick up the phone and call the principal and try to help you out that way. Right. I think that's, but I think people expect it, right? Or they don't understand that that's the system maybe.
I have a question. So if I get an email about something that is, let's say, alarming to me, maybe personally, or just an alarming email or something that's maybe disturbing, is it appropriate for me to email the superintendent and say, hey, I received this email and this doesn't sit right with me? I don't necessarily need to tell the parent that I'm doing that, but if there's something that's happening on campus that is bothersome or just does not feel right, I mean, is that something that's, I mean, Ralph's you're so receptive that, I mean, this is, I guess, just a future question because unfortunately, you know,
Well,
there's
so
going to be a
I'll-
transition and I want to
Let me
make
give you
sure.
my thoughts, and I'd like, if you don't mind weighing in too. I think the answer to that is yes, but the way that I'd suggest it being done, if something like that, would be to forward the superintendent and say, you know, I just saw this, you know, seems like maybe there's some information missing, something's good, like, is this something that you're already aware of, that you're handling? Could you is there a little more information that might help explain what's going on here? I think that kind of an email.
Right.
Is fine. What I think what I'd be a little careful of, I'm not saying anyone here would do this, is I've seen in situations where board members might forward it and make the assumption that everything in that email is accurate, and it becomes an adversarial situation with staff, like, why did you do this kind of a thing? And
Right.
that's not, especially if it's not coming, if it's really coming from one individual board, because then it starts to look like an individual board member giving direction to staff, which we want to avoid. That's a role issue. So I think, but that, hey, I saw this, or you want, I'm guessing you're on top of it, just want to make sure kind of email. And I don't know if
No, I
superintendent-
agree, and that really been the context. And I appreciate it because it gives me a heads up in terms of, here's the issue. I know, okay, thank you. I'm aware of it now, so I can kind of ferret out a little bit if it needs to be, but that's just as you laid it out, makes complete sense.
Yeah, and I mean, following on that though, too, I think that's the same thing. It's just, I'll just say again, because it's so frustrating, that email we get about the coffee is, I would have liked to respond and be like, yes, I'm happy to sit and listen with you, listen to you, because I think that should be our role. But when it's sent to all of us, we can't get together, I guess, because it's not on the agenda, we can't get together to actually discuss that in a way that is fulfilling. So, that's one of those where I don't know if we want to, that's something we asked the board president to handle. That's something whether maybe mentioned at board comments. Is that an appropriate time? Or should we be reaching out to Superintendent Portis to say, is this something we could do, or when should we do it? Like that one's still, and I mean, that ties in with the example you gave as well, but.
Well, and then how do we know how many of us have met with this person for coffee?
Yes.
So like I've met with them, or we went together and met, and now we can't talk to anybody else on the board about going to coffee because that would be a violation of the Brown Act. But meanwhile, you guys have gone to coffee. So
Yeah, that's a really good
it's
point.
just sort of,
Yeah, no,
it's slippery.
yeah,
It's very
well, and I mean,
slippery.
and it's
Not
the same thing.
intentionally, I'm sure, but
Even
yeah.
one member of the, one member of the public or parent could do the same, like they could individually email all of you and say, I'd like to have coffee with all of you, and you could all say, oh, it's one person, that's fine. And I hate, I've told some board members, it's a little bit legalistic, but sometimes you might need to sit down and say, hey, I'm here to listen, and if you've talked to other board members, I'd appreciate you, please don't, I just want to hear what you have to say. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here to hear what other people have had to say. I'm meeting with you. Give me your opinion. Again, I'd much prefer you bring it to the board meeting, but if you can't do that, let's just hear, I want to hear what you have to say, and then I can get you to the right person. I think that's probably the best. If it's a board, sometimes those comments are going to be board policy decisions, and it's not, I have a concern with the teacher or principal, so we're not doing that. I think the board should do ABC. And I think those are also, you could sit down and say, okay, I understand that we're going to be talking about it at the next board meeting. It'd be really helpful if you came to that meeting and shared your thoughts there so the whole board could hear it, right? And that's kind of where it ends. I mean, I think those are kind of how to try to handle those situations. To be honest, when somebody emails the entire board like that and says, I would like to meet with all of you, to me, that's probably a situation where the superintendent and the board president are going to have to figure out, is this something that we need to handle kind of at a more formal level? And if so, I've seen a lot of board presidents send an email to the board saying, I know we all received this. I'm working with the superintendent on it. Something like that, so that there's an acknowledgement. We don't have any substantive discussion about, we think it's a great idea. It's being handled. So don't worry about it. The other thing that could happen in that situation, I think would be perfectly fine, is even if the board president were to send back an email to the folks saying, we know you emailed the entire board. I'm talking to the superintendent about, if some sort of discussion would be helpful or something like that, just so that they're not feeling ignored. The board knows that it's being responded to, because I think sometimes what can happen is if there's a vacuum, it goes like maybe 12, 18 hours and nobody sees anything. And then a board member's like, well, we got to be responsive. And they shoot off an email. Little do they know, 2 other emails already went out that say something slightly different than what they just said. And, again, all great intentions, but it's just, it doesn't work out well. So I think those types of things, if they're to the group, that's really board president, superintendent usually and honestly, if they're emailing the entire board, it's probably something that is really directed to the district and the board as a whole and not to individual folks anyway. So I think that's, those could be tricky, but that's usually what I'd suggest. Something like
They are tricky though, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
They are tricky because sometimes when you get an email, if you're BCC'd on something, you don't even know who else got it. And you're like, all right, so what do I do with this? It's, you know.
And this is where I wonder if this is where we should be putting some norms
Yeah,
in.
so
where
is
we-
there something then, it's like, how do we work? You know, in the most functional way as a board, where it's like, because it's like, I'm inundated all day long, and I'm sure everybody is with emails. It's like, my usual approach is just like, deal with it, get it out of the way, right? But when it's all of us, it's like, and you don't know who else has seen it. How do we manage that? And who manages that? And is it our board president? Is it our superintendent? How do we deal with that? Knowing then I'm happy to hand it off, but I know that it's been handed off. What is our protocol on that? How do we manage that in a way that we know that this voice has been heard? I think that's one of the things that we really care about here too, is like acknowledging that the voices have been heard. But yeah, how do we do that? It's when you don't even know who else has seen it. Very difficult.
Yeah, and I was actually gonna look and see, I mean, I think, and we can kind of work through some examples, because I think a lot of it is, it's obviously fact specific about the email. If you're BCC'd on something, you really got no clue. If it's got your name on it and it starts with, dear board
Yeah.
member, like, then usually you've got a pretty good sense. I still think though, a lot of those responses are still gonna be, most cases should still be pretty short, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's usually gonna be some variation of getting passed off to the board president, to the superintendent. We're talking about that at the next board meeting. It would be great if you could show up and share your thoughts then.
Yeah.
Something, trying to get folks, members of the public, again, we talked about, most people don't live in the education world or with government agencies in the way that, that we do, I guess. And just kind of pointing them in the right direction,
Yeah.
so that next time they've got that concern, they don't email you, they email superintendent, or they come to the board meeting, they know where to find the agenda, like those kinds of things. I think can be helpful. But I don't know, as far as a protocol, so your question is, you're BCC'd on an email. And that just says, dear board,
No, it says your name. Let's give the
it
example.
says your name, but it's BCC'd,
But
Yeah.
right, it's just to
so you
you.
don't know.
Could be 100 people, it could be one person, nobody, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't know, what do you, I have a thought, but I don't know, I want to see what.
Well,
What do you guys think?
off the cuff here, I'm thinking the best way to deal with it would be to say, thanks for your email. It's been read. I acknowledge it, and we'll address it if it's appropriate and reply, and then make sure that it goes then to the board president, who's filtering all of this stuff. That's a heavy burden on the board president though, too, because the board president is really just there to make sure that the meetings run okay. They're not there to deal with all of this stuff coming in, but I don't know of a better way to deal with it than that. It's like maybe the onus is on that person who's like, yeah, I'm president and I'm going to deal with all this stuff, but it's a lot these days, especially. It's a lot. But you want to acknowledge those people too. You're right. You want to acknowledge that voice, that concern that it's not going into some void. So.
And that is something we agreed on, that we at least at one of the board meetings, that we could do, is respond individually with no substance towards decision making. But I feel it's very important, because I used to be that person that would send the emails and hear nothing back and get really frustrated. And so I want to be able to say, hey, I hear you. Thank you for sharing your comments.
And in my early days on the board, I did that a lot too. It's like, thanks for your email. It was read, received, in its entirety, and we'll get back to you. I actually didn't say that. We'll get back to you, or will not, but it was read and received, and it kind of ended with that. Just an acknowledgement that we got it. Thank you. We read it. And after that, but that's better than somebody sending an email saying, I got nothing, it's like, I sent my email and I got nothing back. So it's difficult.
Yep. Just another addition. I have also had an email say, oh, the board president will respond to you. This is before this board. And then they don't. So I think that's a difficult one too, is how do we say, like, this is why it might be better to have more of a proper clearinghouse, instead of saying it's been received and the board will, I say it again, I don't know how to say that, but it's, this is one of the areas where the Brown Act just ties our hands so much, that I don't think we're doing the best because of communication issues. We're not necessarily doing the best
Well,
service to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, from a Brown Act perspective, look, so what the Brown Act says you can't do is you can't, I mean, you know this, you can't have discussions, deliberations by email outside of, or anywhere outside of a meeting, including by email or text. I think whether or not there's communication about, did somebody respond to an email? That doesn't concern me from a Brown Act perspective.
Oh, okay.
How that person responded to the email is not the thing, is the thing that we don't want to share. So there's a difference to me between a board president sending an email saying, I'm working with the superintendent, we're going to send a response. Fine. As opposed to below, please find the response that was sent, that I sent to this person, right? And then the board president has whatever they wrote. So, because then all the other board meetings members are now reading what the board president just said. So I think that's that distinction, being very careful about. It's being handled is okay. It's the substance that we want to be careful about. So that's that distinction. And even better when the superintendent can handle it, because there's Brown Act, the superintendent providing information to the board is not considered a serial meeting. So if the superintendent says, I know you all received this email, it got forwarded to me. Here's the response I sent back to the parent or the community members. That's fine. And then you can all see what he said. You see that it's responded to. Now, I think to the point that was made before, this starts to sound like a lot of work. Because now one email has become at least probably 4 or 5, right? And if you're getting 100 of those a day, you're starting to add up pretty quickly. But the inverse situation is either doesn't get responded to, or they get 3 different responses that don't look the same. Usually, maybe they look the same, and that's not good either. So I do think, and it sounds like you've moved towards that kind of clearinghouse idea anyway. But I think that's probably the best approach. Of course, we don't have the person who would be saddled with that responsibility, but so it's a great time to volunteer her.
Perfect, let's vote.
Yeah.
I do think though, it's a good reminder of where we are when it comes to like just what the protocol is, right? We know it's like, and I know it's frustrating from a parent standpoint to be asked or directed. It's like, well, did you talk to the principal, or did, it's like teacher, principal, right? District and board, but to remind them of what the protocol is too. But I think it's important for us because you get sidelined at Safeway or Trader Joe's too. It's like, my kid got an F, and why did my kid get an F? And it's like, well, did you talk to the teacher? Did you talk to it's like all those things, because we're sort of almost the last stop in that, and to remind those people what that is and how that protocol works. And it's not ultimately satisfying to the parent, but it serves its purpose too. How do we do that and remind ourselves of that there is a structure there, and the structure, if we use it, ultimately should work, I think.
So Jen, I think you were going to say something, so I don't want to jump in front, but I have a direct response to that too. Okay, my direct response, because there could be a situation where a parent asks you a specific thing about policy, let's say.
Okay,
and then
sure.
I would, in theory, email Superintendent Porras, and he would give me a response, or he would direct me to someone to give me a response.
Yep.
I think it's okay if that member says, I don't want to talk to the, if it is a very clear policy, is it okay for the board member then respond with the
Sure.
policy that was given from the administration? I mean, again, this gets into these nitty gritties of communications, because I have done that. And I think that is a role the board can play if folks feel comfortable with you and not necessarily a principal.
I agree.
I don't know.
I would hope that people feel comfortable. And if they don't, and ask us as board members to kind of bridge that gap, it's like we can do that. Although I would encourage people
Exactly.
also, it's like, please do that.
Yeah.
It's like, get over, whatever. If you have an issue, it's like, all right, so that's concerning. But it's like, let's try to bridge that gap, and we can do that, but try to make sure go boom, 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 and do that. And if we have people out there that are concerned about talking to a teacher, about whatever their issue is, or a principal, then their issue is, or whatever, it's like we can address those things too. That's a different stuff, but I hear what you're saying too. Absolutely, yeah.
Were you gonna-
No, I think more of what I think of with the comms piece is like, what is our actual process going to be? Say someone gets an email and you feel it warrants a response more than just, thank you for your email, great news, like the board president or Dr. Porras would respond, because I have that disclaimer on the bottom of all of my emails.
Right.
I just use a short note. It's not like substantive, but then it's like, hey, just so you know, this isn't the end of the line. The board president and or Superintendent Porras, should give you a substantive response. I lost my train of thought.
No, basically, what should the protocol be for that?
That's what I want. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's a
that's
great
where I'm
question.
at. Like,
Yeah.
what is the actual process?
Right.
I mean, do you have a recommendation for how that should go?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a couple different categories. I think if the most extreme is somebody says, I'd like to know as a board member, what is your view on this policy question?
Okay.
As an individual, what do you think? I don't think we can tell board members you can't respond to that.
Yeah.
It seems kind of ridiculous, but you got to be extremely careful, right? Because, there's plenty of stuff that says you're never not a board member,
Exactly.
but you just have to say, 15 times, I think, but I think from a governance perspective, you're also going to include in that, but I'm one of 5. This is something the board's going to have to decide. Please come to the board meeting, right? So that's kind of one extreme. The other extreme email is probably, I've got a complaint about a district employee, right? I think we know what are we doing with that one? That one's getting forwarded to the superintendent. If you want to write back and say, thank you very much, I've forwarded onto the appropriate, person or something like that, or this, I think that's fine. Those to me are kind of the two easy ones. I think when you get into those middle ones, so the question you just had about someone saying, well, what was the district's policy on ABC? And you reached out to the superintendent, got it and forwarded. My suggestion in that case is I would probably redirect that person and say, that's a good question. The superintendent can help and maybe clear this with him before you send the email. But redirect and say, the superintendent can help you get this answer. So I'm copying him here. He'll be in contact. Because what I think that does is then the next time that person has the question, they're going to go, oh, I'm going to skip a step. I'm just going to go straight there. Instead of, if you're the one who goes back with the information, they think, oh, well, that worked. So that must be the way I'm supposed to do this. I'm going to go to you next time again. And then we get into that cycle. So I think redirecting again, so maybe in that case, if it's just an email just to you, you could email the superintendent, say, hey, I got this. I think this is for you. Do you mind if I connect you with the person? Yeah, that's great. Then the email back to the member of the public, I'm copying the superintendent. He'll be able to help you with this. That's what I would do there. On the ones about, I think the board should do this, or I think the district should do this. Those are the ones, even if it's a BCC, I think those are going to the board president and the superintendent. And even if you want to send an acknowledgement, say, I got it. The board president, I've forwarded on as appropriate or something, we can come up with some language there. But I think those are the ones where if it's a question for the district or the board, your bylaws and norms are pretty clear that the president and the superintendent are speaking on behalf of the district. So you really can't respond to those. To me, those are kind of the different categories, I think. And there's a little bit of a different process, but a lot of times it's going to either be, getting it up the board president, the superintendent, or redirecting to staff with folks. Those are kind of the two things that we do. I know it makes a lot of work for board president who's probably listening going, what are you signing me up for? But I still think that's the best. And if you can get folks to see that pattern with communication, then I think they start going to the right person to begin with.
And I think so far, just for President Carolyn's sake, since she's not here, she's been super
She's been
responsive
amazing. Yeah.
to all of the emails that have come in, as far as just acknowledging them and also trying to direct folks in the right direction. So when I think we talk about like bringing community in, that's the kind of thing where it's like, cool, I've been heard, right? Someone's on the other end of this email and they care.
Yep.
And that's kind of like those little small interactions are what are going to build trust and have people like, show up at the board meetings and continue to feel like we're listening and whatever they bring is okay. Yeah.
Another question on that is a hypothetical, not especially if President Swanson's listening, it's not targeted anything, but what if the president sends something that the board doesn't agree with? That, is the job that she should be responding as a board member as the president, or should she be responding? Like, especially if it's a sticky wicket, should she be responding on behalf of the board?
Our bylaws say she's the spokesperson along with Superintendent Porras, so I just defer to those. And that whoever the team is, who are going to come up with talking points, unless it's like specific to President Carolyn is such and such, and she can't be involved, which I don't envision. I think that's part of the role and the job that she's taking on, unless we had like a comms PR person who then took on the role of being kind of the lead writer on emails or being the lead media contact. But right now, as far as I see it, it's Dr. Porras and Carolyn.
But like, for example, again, another hypothetical, what if she were to respond to a parent that said, I want Mandarin taught at our schools? And she's like, completely agree, like, you know, but that's not been something that's been addressed as the board. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I don't know at this point, until that comes up, I trust that she's going to handle it appropriately
I think you make
with
a-
Dr. Porras's expertise and guidance, because it's the team. It's not just one person.
Sure.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, you make a good point though, too, I think, because I think we've seen recently over the last, month or two where I acknowledge your email and then I encourage you to do this. That's different than I acknowledge that your email was received and then that's one thing, but then encouraging action. And I don't know off the top of my head specifically, I could probably pull it up, but I don't want to go there, but to encourage an action, then you should do this. It's like there is a difference there between saying it was received and saying it was received and maybe you should do this, or these are your options, because your options are sort of infinite too. So how do we do that? How do we acknowledge the receipt of an email or a concern, however it comes in? It's usually email. And how do we deal with that versus saying, all right, yeah, thank you, and now you should do this? Because once you encourage an action, that there's a bias there, absolutely and immediately, with what action you might encourage. How do we do that?
I guess I'm wondering if there is a specific example, because that would help me understand a little bit more. But I think, from what I've seen in the messaging is like, I encourage you to follow XYZ process,
Yeah.
or I encourage you to bring this back to the board if you don't get resolution, or I encourage you to talk about volleyball at the next board meeting if you feel strongly about it. So I'm not sure that I feel like responding as the board spokesperson so far. She's been in the appropriate lane, but I'm not sure also specifics what you're thinking of.
No, and I don't want to imply that anybody has done anything
No, yeah.
wrong, other than just, it's like, how do we
we decide how to do
navigate
it? Yeah.
that, right? It's like, because, again, acknowledging somebody's concern is one thing. Thank you, I heard you. Versus, and once it's like just a minute you get into, you could do this or you could do that. All of a sudden, we all have these biases that we carry into what we're doing. It's like, but you could do this, or, it's, once we dip our toe in that, it's like, it gets really, I think at least it gets really complicated right away, other than just saying, thank you. We read it, we understood it, and it's been shared with everybody. And it kind of ends there. And that's frustrating for the person who sent that note. But if you encourage one action or another, the action that we encourage comes with our own bias too, because we've read it and we thought, oh, well, you could do this or you could do that. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not. It's like, I think our intentions are really well-founded. It's just difficult.
Can I stop you for a minute,
Yeah,
Mandy?
please.
Carolyn is online and cannot unmute. President Carolyn is online. Thanks.
Hello, I'm here.
Excellent.
Hello, Carolyn.
Hello, I've heard every word except for about 4 minutes when I lost
in the trees. So is it all right with you all if we do a point of order and Jen McNary kind of asks me the disclaimer?
That'd be great.
Does that work for everyone on the board?
Can hear you great. Welcome to the
Yes.
complication.
Yes.
I have an idea for the complication.
Sounds great.
Good.
Okay, thank you for joining us. I would like to announce for the record that this meeting is now being conducted pursuant to California Government Code, section 54953, subsection B concerning teleconferencing of meetings. Board President Carolyn Swanson is participating in this meeting by speakerphone from Best Western Plus Ocean View Resort, 414 North Prom, Seaside, Oregon, 97138. In accordance with the Brown Act, this location has been identified on the agenda for this meeting. I would now like to ask Board Member President Swanson to respond to the following questions. Are you able to hear our proceedings on this end?
Yes,
Do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
I do.
Has the agenda been posted at your location?
It has.
Is your location such that any member of the public could participate in the public portions of this teleconference meeting from your location?
Yes,
Members of the board, are you able to hear Board Member President Swanson?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yes from everyone. Okay, thank you. Oh, because we have a meeting with teleconferencing, all actions will be roll call, but we won't have any votes this evening. So welcome, President Carolyn. Thanks for
thank you
joining
so
us.
much. Thank you. Is it all right if I chime in on this item?
It would be great.
Yes,
Because
please.
we've been
No.
talking for you for a while, so it would be great to hear it.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so as president, it has been such an undertaking responding to the emails, and it's stressful because I sit there. I probably am spending about 22 hours a week on board stuff as board president. And it's a lot because I do sit there and read every email and kind of question myself, like, would the majority of the board be okay with this? Is this following protocol? I reach out to Ralph, he writes back. So I'm okay doing that. I mean, that was kind of the role that I signed up for, but I do have a couple ideas on how, because like, yes, I'm president now, but I'm not always going to be president. And so that's why I love the question of how can we set up a norm and a process for all of us going forward that can benefit everybody and make sure everyone communicates clearly. So one thing I thought of is the emails that come in, they fall into, to me, they fall into consistent categories. So I'm kind of somebody who looks for patterns. And so like, just for example, for one of the patterns that I see, sometimes people will write in and really I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, okay, like they're wanting to speak at a public meeting. So I'm like typing out like, okay, like I want to make sure that they know how to contribute to public comment. What I would love is if I can, as long as it's okay with the entire board, I can submit to staff kind of these different patterns that I see, and we can generate a graphic that's like, hey, you want to contribute to a PGUSD board meeting. Here are the steps, and it will line out if they're, you know, like you can do it in person, you can do it online, you'll have 3 minutes. It can be a graphic, and I think we can have 3 or 4 graphics that when I'm writing back to people, I can include. And that will be information that the entire board has agreed upon. So there isn't any spin coming from the person sending it because it's a static document that has that information in it. So that's one thing that I had thought of. Another graphic idea would be like the chain of command graphic, right? Like, hey, this is a great question for ... your teacher, your principal / counselor, perhaps someone at the district office, you know, types of things. So that was one of my ideas for these emails.
Let me just, if I can, because I think part of what I heard there was coming up with basically kind of pre-approved responses or
Yes.
or additional information. They may not be pre-approved, because I think that goes to the question about, you know, even from the board president, if the response is, thank you very much for writing in, and then you hit period, and then you're like, what do I say now, right? Because that seems too short, but I don't want to say anything that I can't say, and the board. Well, two questions, two thoughts. Number one, I think the superintendent said before, that clarity at the end of board meetings on items. This is the other place where that comes up. I've seen a lot where the board president's like, well, I think this is what the board decided, but I don't know. And so can I say that or can I not say that? So when the board has clarity about what it is that you're directing staff in the district to do, then when those emails come in, it's a lot easier to respond. Because at the last board meeting, the board decided A, B, C, D, and E, here's the recording, go watch. But I was going to say, just on both of those, I think I don't think that's a bad idea, but I think tweaking it and maybe even just doing links. And the reason I would say links is because then you can always change that information, even if there's a page on the website this is how to participate in a board meeting, and then links to the agenda. Like that would be a real easy thing just to every time ping somebody with and say, it'd be great if you showed up. Here's more information on how to talk to the whole board. Here's the
As
link.
long as the link goes straight to that document.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah,
We do
yeah.
have,
Yeah,
Yeah,
not,
I mean-
not just the board website. Yeah. Or
right,
the
yeah, where they have
district
to
website.
scroll and then they have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find it and whatever, because
And-
I don't want frustration. I don't want to generate any frustration.
And you might already have, a lot of districts will have a page that is, if you have a complaint, here's all of the complaint processes and here's where to go and that kind of thing. You could do the same thing with that. If somebody's, I'm having a concern. You'd have to think about if you want to point them in that direction or another direction, but there are, the idea of having, I guess because when the question came up before, what I was going to say is, I think if that additional, after the thank you, if the next sentence is a process-based type thing, like, you can do this, as long as you're consistent about giving that same information, which is maybe kind of where this is all going. I think that's probably a pretty safe option and looks kind of responsive to the community, also helps kind of on that training information piece. So that sounds like it. I don't know. Does that sound, because I know there was a concern about, if in one email we say, well, you should go do this, does that suggest that, we're kind of tipping our hand about, well, we support this, but we wouldn't do that if somebody else wrote in? I think that was kind of my sense. And again, it's probably completely unconscious in a lot of cases. Like, I think when you're writing back to an email, but maybe this kind of form response piece might help a little bit. I don't know, is that?
Yeah, I want it streamlined. Absolutely. I want anyone who writes in to feel like they got equal attention, equal advice. And if we do these links, then we can also empower other trustees too, and, to guide folks when they're feeling frustrated, to have it all. And it will be information that the entire board has agreed to. So this, I hope, will be the last board presidency where the board president has to wring her hands and be like, oh my gosh, I hope this is okay. Or like Ralph said it was okay, but man, I could see this person or that person on the board not being okay. And then you're just like, I got to get this out. Like, I have a whole entire life besides this volunteer position. And so you're weighing all these things, like people are waiting for a response, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think this could solve it for me, in my opinion.
I just wanted to take a second just to point out again that nobody on this board should ever be looking for perfection. So
Yeah.
we are all
Yeah.
should have the space to make a mistake.
Agreed.
We should all have the space to, within reason, like flub and maybe flail a little sometimes, because I'm very new to this and I plan on probably making a lot of mistakes. So I'm hoping for forgiveness at some point. But I mean, I'm going to talk directly to you, Carolyn, that I've not read an email where I thought, ooh, she put that. I've been fine with all of it. And I just think that expecting perfection from yourself or any of us expecting perfection from anybody is a real, it'll be a letdown always. So I just wanted to put that out there. And that's all.
Thank you.
And I just.
So those are my comments for that item.
Okay, I was just saying, and I do think it's probably worth asking the question too, does it get, I don't think impersonal is a bad word, but at some point, if every email that everybody gets back when they email the board looks exactly the same, is there even a point in sending the response?
Right. And I don't want to make clear, I don't have a problem with any customization of words and things like that. I just want to find that line where we're beyond it, we're uncomfortable, and on this side of it, we're comfortable. And I realize it's a very fuzzy line. But that's what this meeting is a little bit about to me. Yeah. So I'll just echo that what Trustee Otmar said is, yeah, I've not read any emails you've sent, Carolyn, that look unpolished or say anything that I wouldn't say. I'm usually like, wow, that's very well thought out. So.
Well, and I think when it's being run through, like Ralph, if you're involved in these too, so I mean, and I trust that, and I trust that what you guys are coming up with together is what represents the district as a whole. So I have complete faith in that. None of that, that the line doesn't seem too fuzzy for me because I trust that.
So, what I'm actually thinking might be helpful, because I think we've got a little kind of a sense here. We're about halfway through it. But on these email, because I was coming up kind of a list of like, I could think of 1, 2, 3, 4, about 6 kind of emails that you might get. I'm almost kind of wondering, we want to just like go through those 6 and say, yeah, that's kind of the idea how we want to handle them, or try.
If we have time.
I was gonna say,
Or
I'd be
do
happy to
we
have that
want-
be an offline thing. Sorry,
Okay.
Carolyn.
Then
Go ahead.
we can do it all.
No, that's just my thought,
Yeah,
but I want to hear everyone's
No,
thoughts.
yeah, my sense is we won't have time to complete the rest of the meeting if we do that.
Well, I could go back and what I'm thinking I can do is go back and watch this recording. And put those together and maybe try to come up with some examples and make sure that. Because I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. The problem is leaving a discussion like this and everybody thinks there's an agreement, and then the next week, the first email comes in and it turns out that we weren't in quite as much of an agreement as we thought we were.
I do want to make sure that when emails are going back to members of the community, that they do feel personal. And I say that I'm not writing them, Carolyn, President Carolyn's been doing it in a great job. So those responses have, as I read them, have felt personal if I was receiving that email back. And I don't want to lose that. I think to your point about having every email looks the same. The only thing that's different is the link. I just feel like that's the opposite of what we want to put out to the community. If we're just saying, here's our generic response, come again, thank you. And then that's it. People are going to stop writing. They're going to stop attending the meetings, and they're just going to become disgruntled and upset and unheard. And for me, that's the opposite. I say that, and I would not have time to reply personally to each email. So that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and also, we don't, somebody could write it and say, my view is I think the board should do A, B, C, and D. And if the board president, if you're responding on behalf of the board, you can't say, yes, I'm on that side of the policy decision, right?
Yeah.
Because the board hasn't weighed in on it. So I think in some cases like that, the hands are tied of a board president responding if it comes to everybody to say, ideally you could say, we're going to talk about it at the next board meeting, come to the meeting, here's a link on how to do it. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of envisioning you want to try to do. But I guess maybe not even focusing so much on the board president emails, but the ones coming individually to you. It sounds like there's agreement about if it's how do you specifically feel? We know how we're going to handle that. If it's a complaint, we know how we're going to handle that. If it's something that's asking about, why is the district doing this, or why did the board do that, or is that kind of question, those are the ones that are going to the board president and the superintendent. They can let you know that they're going to handle it. They can handle it. And if it comes to the board president, you're not going to see it. If it comes to the superintendent, they can share that information. That's kind of, if I had to quickly summarize where I think we're landing. And then these links might be a good idea on the board president responses, just to kind of make sure everyone's getting the same process piece. Does that sound?
Yeah, William, one point about your summary that is actually not quite what we do is any email that I get as board president, unless it's like, I don't know, like, hey, I saw your child today at school and she was really happy. Like, I don't forward those to the rest of the board. But any email that I get, I respond back to the individual who sent it. And then I actually send that through Ralph's office out to the entire board.
So, yeah, I don't know. I have a little bit of concern sometimes if the substantive response is going back to the whole board, even if it's coming through staff. Because, a board member could write back and say, yes, I'm very much in favor of that. I'm going to vote for it. I don't think that would happen. just because that comes through staff doesn't change the impact of it. So that piece, maybe we could talk about a little bit about how we can work on that, because I'd be a little, I want to massage that a little bit. Because yeah, that substantive response piece, usually we try to keep away from the rest of the board by email. Just because again, it can, and the reason for that is that the email from the board president, the rest of you read it, that's only 2. But if 2 of you have talked to each other about the same topic, and the board president doesn't know that, now you're reading her email, you know what the 2 of you think. Now we're starting to look like 3, right? Whether or not that's really what the Brown Act is trying to prohibit, probably not. Usually those emails back are going to be informative, so I'm not too concerned.
Yeah.
It's probably just more a practice issue that we could look at. But again, if the responses can come from the superintendent, we don't have that issue at all. That's it's.
I would be more than happy to give that task over to the superintendent.
I mean,
Is that what
actually,
you're saying?
you
Is that what you're saying,
I
William?
do think largely that what we're seeing is other board members, when President Carolyn responds to those, the response is mostly just like, thank you, we got it. And we're listening, and it
Yeah.
kind of ends there.
Then that's fine.
She's
Okay,
been exemplary actually in navigating the Brown Act rules when it
Agreed.
comes to that. I get what you're saying
Yeah, yeah.
too. It's like we need to be careful, but I think that Carolyn has done a really good job on that and never taking a position on those things, but keeping us informed and sort of taking us off the hook too, knowing that, you know, that it's been acknowledged. Very, very, very occasionally I might pick up the phone when I see an email, because it might be somebody that I know, and I'll pick up the phone and say, just like, let's talk about choir for 10 minutes. Let's take choir in particular, right? These days, let's talk about that. And let me give you the lay of the land. And I'm not trying to help them in one way or the other, but just trying to give them an idea of where we are. But, you know, and that's something that we might want to talk about later too, is like, you know, the relationships that we have in the community. But mostly it's like, thank you for the email, and here's the protocol, and directing them to that. And I think Carolyn's done a good job of navigating that too.
And just
Please,
quickly,
Elliot.
the point that you're making on I actually think this board, we are over cautious on Brown Act stuff. From what I see, like, we don't even email like what time is the board meeting tomorrow?
Yeah.
Which would not be Brown Act, but like, so that's something I think I feel very safe with this board personally, that we've not been treading on that. But
Okay.
at the same time, I do think it's important, you know, where it does, the part where it does get tough is where there have been substantive, discussions between 2 board members offline. And then, you know, if another board member does not know about those discussions, then that would be one of the areas of the Brown Act that I personally would be most afraid of, because then I could see saying like, oh, you know, Laura, you know, what do you think of this? Or, I mean, and then you might have already had a conversation with, you know, Brian about it. And then it's like, oh, now what?
Well, at that point, I would say, I
Okay.
have no comment.
Okay.
And you would know what that means.
Okay.
Yeah, and again,
It's, there's a personal responsibility there, I
Yeah,
think.
okay.
to- Yeah.
And to your point before, I don't think it's actually written in the Brown Act anywhere, but I don't believe that it expects perfection either. So at least I've never seen it enforced that way. So no, I think, you know, look, you get the email, go, sorry, can't talk about this. That's easy. And I think as to what was being said about those responses coming back, if they're really not substantive, then I'm not concerned. If they're substantive, I think that's where we get the issue with the Brown Act. But if it's, thank you very much, come to the next meeting, we'll be talking about it. That's great. That's fine. Not a problem. So that may actually not be then. Thank you for that clarification, because I don't think that's.
So I'm back on that task. Okay, got it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, it's about
You wanna take
4:40. Should we take a 5 or 10-minute break? People, thoughts? Anyone?
Sure.
Yes.
We need to.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be happy actually circling through too, just because we do have a lot on here. So I
By
can go,
circling through, you mean?
like, I have to go to the bathroom, so I can go right now and then have you guys keep talking.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break so
Like,
everyone can take a break. We'll be back at 4:45.
We have, well, I was trying to think, because we've got a little more than an hour. It seems like kind of the other, well, we could talk about a couple of things. One is, we didn't talk about so much communication with staff, but we didn't talk about necessarily communication between board members, and I think that kind of gets into board meetings a little bit. So I'm kind of wondering if we want to talk a little bit about what board meetings look like and communications between board members. Is that, because I heard a couple requests about, safe spaces, and I assume a lot of that is about the meeting. Is that something that you guys want to talk about? Where I just want to get a sense of how we want to spend our time. And the board president too. Actually, we didn't ask at the beginning what she was looking to get out of this, so maybe that would be a good place to start.
Oh, Carolyn, it looks like the reception between.
Covered what I was hoping would be covered.
Carolyn, it looks like the reception between. The connection is a little bit slow. We didn't catch what you said.
We're not hearing.
We're not hearing anything you're saying. I'm not sure if it's an issue on our end. No, it doesn't look like it. Still not hearing you. Okay.
Feel free to call a cell phone too, if that's easier. We can put you on the mic.
Okay, we'll see you in a moment. Thank you.
Like that, that was inventive though.
Posted
Yeah. The post.
We're writing it when all else fails, right?
That's good, right?
The other
back
one,
to the analog post-it system.
yeah.
Yeah.
and I'm not doing this just because but trustee or President Carolyn's gone, but the other thing I brought up in mind was communications, the Facebook side. And I mentioned this in one of our meetings. I personally have a page that I don't post much on. I would just love for us, I think that's a good one for us to come up with a board norm on. And so when Carolyn does come back, I would like to ask her thoughts. I mean, if I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I think that is a gray area. If other folks agree, or would you rather not, given our short time?
I don't have any questions about social media, but if the majority of the board thinks it would be valuable, yeah.
Well, I always do. I mean, I think that while I'm very anti-social media, but I know that that's the world we live in right now. And so I'm always conflicted when it comes to that. I think that, right now, I'd be surprised if anybody disagreed that for the people at the dais right now, the most present person when it comes to social media is our president, Carolyn Swanson. And my concern remains the same as it has over the couple last few years. Really, it's just like, it's great, right? I love that she's pushing information out. I think that the district could do, it's like, if we have to do that, and I guess we have to do that the district did a better job. And a few years ago, I voiced the same concern, that it's like, one of my concerns is that people become reliant on this voice. And it's not the voice of the district, it's the voice of somebody who is on the board. And what happens when that person is no longer on the board, or what happens when this person is no longer expressing the views of the board or the district? It's like it's channeled through one person. And so how do we do that? If we're going to have a social media presence, I think we need to really own it. And that, I just get really hung up on that. And I also get hung up because I think social media it's been bad for our kids too. And it's bad for our present, or our parents too. And so, but we're using this thing that I think has been kind of bad for a lot of people as a communication tool. So I really get hung up on that, and I don't know where to go with it. And I have no solutions. I only have concerns.
I have a solution. Okay, I have a suggestion, and this is one I thought would be, is do we put that in the same box as a response to email? Whereas we're trusting the board president to be in charge of social media in the same way an email would be sent out. Yeah.
I don't know if President Swanson's on. Okay, if she is, the Facebook account we're referring to is not a district Facebook account.
Mhm.
It's a private one. It was actually her campaign account. I'm sure she can speak to it, and she doesn't purport, because we can all follow it and read it. The account doesn't purport to represent the viewpoint of the whole board or all of the things people should know about the district. It's her take. Like, you have the right to post a lot or a little on yours or whatever you would. What I would love is the district to take over. Like, I would love us to ramp up our comms, you know? We may not like social media, but it's the way people communicate. So at some point, maybe we just have to swallow it and swallow the pill and say, like, this is how people want to receive information, and do it. And I would love to see us have a goal of some sort to be like, hey, this place where we know the community goes for information currently has this many likes or follows. We're going to beat it by such and such a date. And here's our plan to be like, how are we going to ramp up our social media? Like, what do people want to know about? I think, you know, when we think about like being out in the community members want to know what's going on. Like, hey, there was an awesome event at Robert Down. Here's some highlights, you know, so we can brag on the things that are working and also share out information. Like, hey, reminder, board meetings coming up. Maybe parents don't check their email, but they probably check Facebook. You know, it is
Right.
a way in which, you know, communication can be established. I would love to see the board, the district take over that responsibility, because I do feel like President Carolyn is providing a service to the community, and I think it's one that should probably be in the district's.
Yeah, I agree.
Role.
I agree. I miss so
Do-
much stuff.
Do we
I-
have a Facebook page?
Mhm.
And
We
is
have
it,
Facebook, we have Twitter. I'm sure we probably have a TikTok thing
who's,
too.
who minds
probably.
the
Do we have
Facebook?
TikTok also?
You, hi,
God.
We have a Facebook page.
you have
we
3
a Twitter
minutes.
account. We have a system that anytime our mass email system also posts to Facebook and also posts to Twitter. And I think 90% of the time we do that. It also posts an announcement on our website, and tend to do that a lot as well. Not for every little thing, but for the big stuff.
Okay.
But I think that the point here is that there's stuff that's nuanced that President Carolyn is providing as a service to the community. So I do wonder then, following on the suggestion I made, is would it make sense for the board president and the superintendent to have a role on the PGUSD Facebook page so that is being done, or do we need some more comms to do that? I don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, my personal take on this is the difference between what we put out and what I'm guessing she puts out is ours has to be more official. I
Mhm.
mean, Mr. Director is the one who's actually taken over a lot of those announcements, and they're not as quick because they have to be official, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have to be politically correct.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. So that's why it may not come out as quickly as a lot of people would want.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, our presence on Facebook and Twitter seems to be more one way than two-way communication. You know, I've worked for other LEAs in the past where there's a lot of two-way back and forth on an LEA's social media site. Again, back to the discussion earlier, it takes folks to be able to do that and have the bandwidth to do so, and also be in the mindset to be correct in their response because they're representing the school district.
Yeah.
It's not an individual page. So I've seen successes and failures as it relates to social media and local educational agencies. But there's a lot to do there. And I think that, you know, we can explore that. But right now it's basically one-way messaging.
It was very interesting when I think most of us were at the CSB, California School Board Association, and it's so many, yeah, right, CSBA, AE, so many letters. But so I jumped in on that social media, and I thought I might be, I really thought it's like, oh, I'll see what's going on here, and I'll drop in, and you were there too. And wow, that room was full of people trying to navigate this world. It's so complicated. And most of the people that were there were from districts who actually have like public information officers, right? Who are navigating that, and we don't. And I realized sitting in there too, it's like how complicated that world is. I didn't really realize. I just thought it was kind of us, and it was not us. And how do we manage that? And every time, even, you know, you have to be so careful, even if you just push out a notice on this, that it doesn't contain any kind of bias. It's like, oh, this, or if you're going to push this out, then you have to push everything out. And you choose to not push something out, well, then that's a bias too. How do you do that? Or how do you push people towards what's happening within the district? It's complicated, and there was a lot of energy in that room during that. That's for sure.
I just a quick, so again, coming back to the norms and based on what Clerk McNary said, I would be perfectly fine. I liked your division of the personal website versus a school website. And I also agree with your point that it would be really nice to have a lot more information going out, but the complexities behind that, I guess I would love for us as a norm, like if we all feel comfortable having personal websites that represent personal, I would love to post more on my Facebook page, but it's something I've held off on. So that's why, to me, part of this is coming up with what our norms are for that.
I feel like if what we're posting is, you know, look at this great event, or I'm so proud of our district, or positive messages, nothing that's, you know, maybe personal opinion. I think that can be, that might get a little bit fuzzy. I'm comfortable with whoever wants to have a Facebook page that is saying like, look at how much we love our district and look at these cute little kids that got up and danced today at Robert Down, like how exciting and how fun, those types of things. I mean, I don't see a problem with that at all.
So I guess, so two things, if I can, I just would jump in. So I think there's two. One question is, you know, does the board want there to be more activity on social media by the district? That would be a longer term goal, conversation, staffing, you know, rules about what the district posts, what it doesn't post, all that stuff. You could do it, but it's an undertaking, right? The other side of that is, what about individual board members? And that this was probably, because there's the rules around this, although you probably saw 2 days ago, I think the Supreme Court just took a case on this out of Poway, where 2 board members they took their campaign websites, they were acting like they were school board websites, there were people giving them a hard time, so they just blocked them. And they got sued, and the Ninth Circuit said, yeah, you can't do that, and the Supreme Court just took the case. So we're going to find out if you can do that or not. So that area, you've got to be really when you have official accounts, you've got to be extremely careful about what you do. And that, like, actually, we were talking about the two-way communication on like that. That
can turn quick,
stuff that would probably keep most attorneys up at night, because like usually a lot of LEAs, it's like you could post, but just turn off comments. Like, we don't want to have any back and forth, because who knows who's going to put what there. But in any event, as far as individual board members, to me, it's kind of like what we were talking about with the other forms of communication, which is, if it's, you know, I think this, or here's something that I saw, or here's a great event I want to share, those kind of things, I don't think there's any issue from a governance perspective. Where I think you run into issues is where it looks like it's being posted on behalf of the district or on behalf of the board, right? And it's just the same thing that if you went out and talked to somebody in public, you would be speaking as yourself. You wouldn't be speaking as the board or the district, unless the board or district has said, go ahead and do this. So I think I don't think there's anything wrong with posting. I think it's about that it's got to be the individual posting, not on behalf of the board. The only other thing to be very careful about, this was your Brown Act overlay, and you probably heard about this at that presentation. The legislature thought it'd be fun to mess with everybody on this one. Everything else is a rule of 3. Social media is a rule of 2. Don't know why, but so I just have to say that we're talking about it. You can't respond, you can't like, probably shouldn't even be sharing something posted by by somebody else on social. You could share, if the district posts something, you could share it. If another trustee does it, don't like it, don't respond to it. I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. So just to make your lives more complicated when it comes to social media.
It's so complicated, right? I do sort of get why it's like, I mean, and often even, it's like we get these directives from the state. It's like, you need to do this or you need to do that. And by the way, we're not going to pay for it. We're going to make you pay for it, or we're going to make you figure it out. It's like, here's our suggestion. And by the way, you can then lay down the law, but it's like, here's our suggestion. Thank you very much. Not, but I do get where they're going with it. It's very complicated. It's like, I don't know where you draw the line between when you're pushing out information and when you're running for an office. So those are different things. And that's one of the things that got talked about during the CSBA panel on social media too. It's like, where do you draw that line between running for a position and then representing your constituency? And what is your constituency too? It's like, is it this now these days, especially, it's like, it's this block between 9th Street and, and 14th, or is it everybody? How do you manage that? And I don't know what the answer is to any of that stuff, but it makes it more complicated when we're talking about what we're doing and how do we push out information for the district and who is really the definitive voice in all of that stuff. If you're going to start to push out information as a board member, you should probably be pushing out all of the information. And as a board member, though, too, shouldn't you really be trying to make sure that you have the voice of the district really being that definitive voice? It's hard. There are no easy answers to what we're talking about here. I know it's complicated.
Is the board president? Because I feel like we're having started this discussion. I know she was there, but I don't know if we still have her or not.
President Carol, are you there?
Okay.
Oh,
I just
yeah,
wanna make
I'm
sure.
here. I heard
Which-
it all.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess what I would just say is I understand. We also run into this, little thing called the First Amendment. So
It's a little tiny thing. It's only the first one.
only the first, yeah. It's so important they didn't get it in the first time, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess the only thing I would say about that is, I mean, there's a difference between what's legally permissible and what's governance, right? Good
Yeah.
best practices. So a lot of what we're talking about is from a best practices perspective. I still tend to think that for the most part, if somebody wants to, as an individual, say, I think this, or I think this, I think this is a great event, I think you should go do this, whatever. I think it's hard for a district and a board to say, you can't do it, we don't want you doing any of that. If someone's saying, on behalf of the board, ABDC, whatever, that's where I think from a governance perspective, it starts to become a concern. But if board members want to say, this is a great event, congratulations to the seniors, whatever, like, I wouldn't be too concerned with that. But I think, it's that governance thing, and maybe putting, for anyone who's in any situation like that, email, talking to a member of the public, if you knew another board member was doing the same thing, but just saying the opposite of what you were saying, would that concern you from a governance perspective? I guess that's maybe one way to think about it. And what's that how does that impact the dynamic of the group? But I don't know that it's so cut and dry that we could say, you can't do this. I think it's just think about it when you do it. It's probably back to we're not expecting perfection. Especially when it comes to something, because it'll also change by next week. So there's that. I don't know about the district getting a TikTok account, but
God, I hope not. We don't yet, right?
I'm the last guy to manage that one.
yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, so
Yeah, I think you touch on an important point though too, about it's like, what are our best practices? How do we do this? And how do we function as a board when we channel information out? How do we function as a board or as a district? And there are things that ultimately could bite us that we're not having to face right now. But if you have a voice that, let's say somebody does not get reelected, and that person now has become, a voice for the community who's not part of the board. I think you know what I'm saying. It's like, it's weird that, and I think one of the things that we touched on a little bit is like, okay, so if that is where we are, and And we know we live in this world now of social media and we're not getting away from it. So how do we, as much as I would like to, but we're not. So how do we own that? If we're going to have a social media presence, how does the district own that? We need to own it. And the district and the board needs to own it. We need to do a great job with it so that people are not going somewhere else and saying, all right, it's like, this is this person, this is where I get my information. It's like, no, you need to go, when I go to, bad example, actually not a bad example, Smash Mouth. It's like you go to smashmouth.com. That's the definitive voice, right? That's where you get the information. We've shut down everything else. So anything else that's happening with that band comes through there, not smashmouth.net or whatever, or org or whatever. It's like, that's where it comes from. We own that, and we need to own it in the same way as a district. We have to be the definitive voice and figure out what that is for our social media presence. We have to do that. Otherwise, we're vulnerable too, to a degree, I think.
I agree with what you're saying. I think that this is probably a conversation for a little bit down the line,
Yeah.
because right now the district is
We're okay, right?
we're okay right now. And time is kind of, we can't overstretch. We will not overstretch. So, I think that this is definitely a discussion for maybe the future. I feel comfortable with the way that things are now. And as long as I'm speaking for myself, I'm okay with everybody understanding that you just don't speak for the board.
Yeah.
And be respectful and tactful with the things that you're posting. And I think that we all have an idea of what that is. And until we can establish more of a social media presence as a district, I think that as long as we all understand sort of the general rule of it, then I'm happy. I feel good about it.
Well said.
That and don't respond to anybody else's post. Okay. So that's my legal piece there. Okay,
There you
good.
go.
So I just want to make sure I take notes because I do want to try to throw together a summary at the end here. Okay, so I think the other maybe third category we're talking about a little bit, and this might still talk more about board communication, was as far as meetings. And I know that there was some discussion about making them either more efficient or more effective. Both of those things may be more efficient. But I think that also touches on, there was discussion about having a safe space, also even board member communication with each other. So is that something else that folks have questions about? I think you guys talked about it a little bit in one of the meetings before. I could be wrong. But is that something else that would be helpful to touch on, or are there other topics? Because we've got about 50 minutes. We can go long, but 50 scheduled minutes.
I can jump in a bit. I think we had a discussion a couple weeks ago too, just about like efficiency versus effectiveness, and I can get touchy on that. I know, and my apologies to everybody about kind of not being cool about the way I approached it, but because I've been on the board for so long now too, it's like a lot of these things that I've seen it's like, oh, we see this again. We see warrants, we see this contract, we see that. And I get impatient about some of those things too. I do. I'm sorry, but it's like that should be, it's like, all right, let's just knock this out. Let's go. And I want to move things along so much because I think what I really want to do on the board is tackle bigger things. It's like, what are we going to do? It's like we've got the third rail in the district here about, it's like, do we restructure what's happening with the elementary schools and do we, recombine those and divide it up, all those things. It's like, we just never get there because we're having these conversations about, who signs this contract, or is the fingerprinting been done correctly? But I've been here so long now too, that I know the fingerprinting has been done, and it's frustrating, but I get it too for people who are new on the board too. It's like, I understand you want to ask those questions too, and those are legit. So how do we navigate that world to move more efficiently through all of that? And so that we can do these things that I feel are more substantive. And I don't know exactly how we do it. I just want to move things along. And, we've had a few meetings that have gone till 11. And I don't want the meetings to go to 11. I don't think anybody does. It's like, how do we do those? And how do we make these things? And I think I've probably talked to everybody about these too. It's like I want to engage the public, but the public is not going to get engaged when our meetings go to 11. It's torture. I watched a city council meeting a couple days ago, and those city council meetings make our meetings look like a Taylor Swift show. It's like ours look great compared to what's happening at the city council. Those are awful. They're torturous. And how do we make these what's happening here actually really engaging, border even on entertaining? We want people to know. We want people to come here to know that something's happening that involves their community. How do we do that? And that's ultimately my goal. It's like, I want people to come here and go, oh, something happened and my voice was heard and something changed, or maybe it didn't, it's like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I want people to come here because they feel like something is happening. And how do we do that? And that's the end of whatever I'm saying.
William,
Yeah.
can I speak
Of course.
about this item?
Anybody can.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Brian's comments. So I actually see things very differently. I feel like I see that if we want to do bigger things, we need to utilize superintendent goals, district goals, strategic plan, long-term, short-term plan as tools to do that. And we don't really have that foundation right now as a board. So I would like to see going forward, adding those to our board calendar, sticking to them. I think once we add them to the calendar, we'll stick to them. But to me, whenever I go to CSBA or I read books about governance, like those are what I have seen as the tools for those bigger items. So William and the rest of the board, can we talk about that? Because maybe that's not the right tool. I would love to know that, but I think that's where we can plug in those things. And so maybe on that point, I shouldn't say that I disagree with Brian, but I hear him saying that and I'm like, well, I think we do have tools that we can accomplish that. So are those the proper tools for those bigger items?
Well, I don't, does anybody else want to, I'm happy to weigh in, but.
Oh, I was just gonna, as the consent puller of all time, I know that I pull a lot, and I guess I just wanted to comment about it. Coming in with sort of fresh eyes and looking through these, some of these contracts and seeing that, quite frankly, I mean, some of it's pretty sloppy. And so tightening that up now, when it comes to something like fingerprinting, for me, that's like red flag safety issue. And so as tedious and painful as I make it, and I apologize for anyone that's listening that feels that way too, the purpose behind that is sometimes when you pull a Band-Aid off slowly, it stings a little bit, but I mean, I don't know really where I'm going with the Band-Aid thing, I guess, because I work in the hospital, but I just like, eventually those details will get worked out and we will move on from that, because that will be buttoned up and we will move through the consents quickly. But I can't read through a consent that isn't buttoned up and be okay with it. And so over time, I would expect that they'll be tidy and I'll feel good about that, but I'll continue to pull them until they are. And so lesson learned, and we'll move on to bigger things. And I feel like there's now less and less consents being pulled specifically transportation and fingerprinting. But, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's a fresh set of eyes on things. And I feel like that's a good way to make sure that things that have been moved through in the past. You know, you get it. All right.
No, I just totally legit. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
In following on the tools idea, and this is something again, that I have had no problem with it either, just to be clear, but the is one of the things that I think President Carolyn's put into place about emailing beforehand, though, hopefully will get us through some of those nitty gritty before we get in the board meeting. If it's like, hey, you have a typo on this page, right? Not saying that's why you're pulling, but like, that's the kind of stuff we hopefully can deal with via email to the district office. So then we can talk about the actual, like, is one school getting, you know, is one school not have the money they need to do a field trip, for example? I don't know. But you know, I agree with you. If something's not being addressed through email or through repeat times, then pulling consent might be the only other tool we have available to us. So I do understand that. I agree with that.
I think as far as our looking at our goals and our strategic plan, and as far as using our time efficiently, the calendar is a great place for all of us because it's somewhere we can house that information. If we're going to review it annually and we want it to be current for what we're looking at, then it also helps us budget our time better. So being the person who likes the calendar, you know, when we all went to CSBA, especially new trustee orientation, they really kind of shared that we should use that as a tool to be able to get to some of the things that we can't get to, you know, so if we prioritize them in that way, I think that's a good starting point, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm happy to take on some of our calendar, CSBA calendar alignment, maybe looking into next school year, if anybody else is interested, just an idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just gonna say, though, I just wanted to kind of hear what everyone said. I think that I heard at least kind of 2 or 3 ideas in there. I mean, using the calendar, obviously emailing those questions back and with staff and hopefully getting answers back timely. And I think actually could be wrong. I think there's actually talks about 5 days in advance in here, which would be on the outside end of what I have probably seen from other districts, but it is what it is. Maybe it's aspirational. But in any event, I think using study sessions on those big you can't talk about, I think it's very difficult to talk about, you know, goals and those strategic planning at the end of a 3-hour meeting. That's not the time to be doing it. I know there's plenty of districts or plenty of boards that'll do it for budgets and LCAPs and that kind of thing. Just set a separate meeting, just talk about that. So I think those are all tools. Obviously, on the other hand, that's, you know, more time and more meetings for you and for district staff, and also to ask the public to come and be there for something else. Although Zoom helps a lot. But I think used correctly, those are all good tools, because that way, when you get to the meeting, I don't think there's anything wrong with a long meeting, as long as it's productive, right? I think what boards get frustrated is when you're there till 11 o'clock at night and you're like, well, we got through 3 things. And maybe 2 of them seem like they should have taken 25 minutes, right? Or 10, 15 minutes. So I think that's, you know, the efficient effectiveness, not so much that it just happens to be long. I would be equally concerned with a meeting that was an hour long, or shorter than that. And there's no discussion. Every item comes up, the superintendent says, let's do this. The board says, okay, sounds good. And we move on. Feel like, I don't know about that. I will say, and this is something just to that point that I've heard Greg say from being on other boards too. There's also nothing wrong with a board member saying, you know, thank you for the presentation. I read everything you sent in advance. I've had all my answers, questions. I'm ready to vote. Right?
Yeah.
Like, there's not a need. There's not a need, I think, for just to make a statement before every item, every board member.
Yeah.
And some boards do that, some don't, but it's just saying, yep, I'm good to go. I've done my homework. I'm comfortable. I'm ready to vote. On the flip side, when you're not, saying you're not is also fine too. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So those are some things, because I think sometimes board meetings turn into we're going to give 5 explanations to the public for what's going on every item. And that can make it 5 times as longer. And if you're lucky and you're on a board with 7 people, then you're there even longer, but.
I think you bring up a good point too, right? Where it's like, and I vacillate between one side or the other on this, where it's like, sometimes I will ask a question for clarification and I'll get it, right away. And then I'll ask that question again because I want whatever audience we have to know that here's a little more information. But I go back and forth as a board member between, it's like, so what's my responsibility to share with the public a little bit more information? And sometimes it's just like, you know what, public, you got to get on board here. And if you really want to know, I'm not here to explain this to you. And then the other side is like, I'm actually here to explain this to you. It's like, how do we do that? And it depends. It's like, and at what level? So it gets complicated, I think, when we're behind here as to what, it's like, what are we doing? What's our role? Sometimes I do think it feels like our role is just to explain to the public because, and I'm out there less than the rest of us are, but it's like, what do we do? And how do we explain these things that are happening to people? My kids are older now, so we're beyond that. But for other folks, it's like, they really do need to know. And how do we navigate that? It's complicated. I'm these days, and probably with no surprise, I'm leaning more towards, it's like, hey, public, figure it out. We meet every couple weeks and come on and sit, here's the packet and we're online. You don't even have to come here to catch it. But I'm still also there where it's like, oh, you know what, this is a weird thing. And or we do this every year and this is why we do this, and explain to people. It's tricky.
Well, I mean, maybe I'd ask a question. Is there a difference between explaining it and explaining it 5 times? I guess maybe.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think that, and also, is that an explanation? Are those situations where that should be coming from the board, or is that something that really becomes a staff thing?
Yeah.
To provide that information so that then the board's just not playing decision maker, is being the decision. I think that's something else that might be interesting. Any other thoughts on?
I have a thought. To the other comment about, that the board meeting should be engaging the community. I think that, to me, we as a district, we have an opportunity to do better. And I mean, I think this would actually need to come from staff and not board. So maybe it would be board direction to staff, but engaging the community, holding, having principals, making sure among our, and I even hesitate to say if we're base of that, because as a board member, I don't know, we may actually have a very strong base of principals and teachers and maybe even district office communicating with the community, but I don't hear about it. So again, it's like this communicating miniature town hall equivalents. Are we having site council meetings where maybe a dozen parents know about it? And, I would love to start seeing some data collected in the district of like, hey, this time we had site council and there was, 9 people there and 4 people in the public, but like, then we had our next one and we had 15 people and 12 people in the public and they were different, like just some sort of basic gauge of that. Cause as a board member, I feel out of the loop. I will be honest, I feel out of the loop. And I really hesitate to ask staff outside of a meeting for updates on this, because then I really love the board meetings. I love that that's the time slot that we're supposed to get our business done. We're supposed to ask our questions. We have a way to ask questions about the packet. But I have these other things that are just kind of in my mind. And so the other thing about the board meeting, it is extremely long, Brian. You're right. When it comes to, it's extremely long in the eyes of the parent who has not signed up for this
task as being a board member and who's juggling all the responsibilities of being a parent or a guardian. And in that, we should have a really effective board meeting snapshot. But what we have right now is something that it's not effective. I'll just say that. And so we need to, I would say we would want to give direction or ask staff to make that more effective, pull it out from a batch email, make it something that is succinct and digestible from a parent's point of view. I think a lot of what we're talking about tonight would require either a contracted person coming in to do communications or hiring someone, which of course would be
Carolyn, or President Carolyn, we're,
for us to discuss. We want listener instead of participant for the first.
President Carolyn,
Yeah?
you're cutting out. I don't think we heard the last minute or two of what you were saying.
Oh.
The connection is poor.
Oh, sorry. Let me get by the window.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Anyways, long story short, I think we have a future agenda item in our future to talk about maybe having a staff member or hiring a staff member to increase communications and doing for example, a board meeting snapshot that's digestible to parents and somebody having the time and the staff member having the time and the bandwidth to actually check for understanding out in the community. Hey, does this snapshot even, give you the information that you're hoping to get? Because the board meetings are long in the eyes of the person juggling all of their tasks, but we've been getting work done. So I'm not really interested in shortening the meetings, but we may need to increase the meetings so that we have more time to get those items done. So that's my spiel. Thank you.
I think that kind of tied all three of the things that we were talking about together, didn't it? Communication, who's doing it, and more of it. So actually, we'll write that down. Where else? Oh, I guess one other, and this came from, I think there was some discussion about this at one of the other meetings as far as the staff questions, but the use of, as far as questions going to staff before board meetings, and then that information coming back to the entire board and that process and making sure everybody was on the same. I think there was reference to a Google Doc, which attorneys don't like, but
An uneditable Google Doc by the board. That's the key thing. Yeah.
no, we don't like it because it's hard to see when things change, but in any event, no, I don't have a concern with that, but I guess, is that something else that is, it sounded like that was already a tool that was in process, so that even if questions are coming in from any trustee, that information, the responses are coming out to everybody on the back end. Is that sort of how that process has been going, or is that how it's intended to go anyway?
I've been
Yeah,
really
I'll
happy with
say that I've learned new information in meetings that wasn't contained in the Google Doc, so I don't know. I guess that's the extent of what I know.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is a new system that we've just started using in the last few meetings, so.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think the system has been really useful because a lot of times if another trustee has the question, I'm getting it. And then I also think it's super valuable for us all to come to the meeting with the same information, especially if there were clarifications made, because it's a lot to be absorbing the information on top of the packet and then getting changes that are coming in at the last minute. It's a lot to process and to still do a good job with the information. So, I mean, I would like us to all be using that system.
I think that's one. I mean, that goes to and I'm sure it's in here probably 3 or 4 times, the no surprises, piece. I'm sure you've heard that at CSBA too, but and it goes both ways, right? It's staff would like to know about the questions before they get to the board meeting, and the board would like to know about the answers before they get to the board meeting. And that way, when we get to the board meeting, there's no one hears anything for the first time, hopefully. I know we're looking for excitement and entertainment, but that's not usually
No.
the type of excitement and entertainment that boards want. So,
No.
William, can I speak to a detail of that system?
of course.
So I was wondering if the board would agree to this. So one thing about that system you know, there's actually quite a lot that's great about it, and I'm glad that we started it. But there is one thing where if a trustee happens to text or make a phone call to a staff member, because maybe, which I'm not saying is a bad thing to do that, but then the tricky part is how does that end up with the question and answer getting into the document? And so my solution to that is, like, for example, for the last meeting, I asked Josh a question. Well, I asked Ralph if I could ask Josh the question. Ralph said yes. Then I talked to Josh on the phone. And after I did that, I told him I was going to send him my question in writing, so then he could copy and paste it and put it into the Google Doc, which he did, and then he answered it. So just for the rest of the board, if that's what you all want to do, I think we can save staff from having to have that on their shoulders. We're like, oh gosh, now I need to summarize what Trustee Hazen, Trustee Brian Swanson, Trustee Laura, Trustee McNair, you know, all of this is happening. So that's the system that I've been using.
Just a comment. I also, I mean, that's a really good point. I try to make sure if it's a question about an agenda for that Google Doc, I make sure it's sent via email. But I agree with you, the point that sometimes it happens via the phone, and it's useful to get that discussion. That is a good way to do it. But I would even be comfortable saying, if we're asking a question about the agenda, that email would be the preferred approach, and then anything that's not email would get summarized.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is preferred. But sometimes, like, you know, sometimes we want to ask something or it just comes about in person, you know, on the phone, text. If it's through a different channel, I think it should be on the shoulders of the trustee to then submit their question in writing, right? Like, okay, you've had your conversation, submit it in writing, so then that staff member can still follow that system that we set up, if that makes sense.
Is that from a staff perspective, is that workable? Maybe better?
Yeah, I think just that, as you said, the email is the easiest way, just to plug it in, and Mandy, my assistant, gets, as long as she's CC'd on it, we're able to get it onto that doc and kind of get it separated out to where it goes. If we get something on the phone, well, we try to get it onto the Google Doc as well. It just depends on, you know, on the question. Sometimes there's a question we'll get that's just a real basic answer that not necessarily going to affect the outcome of any long conversation. So, but typically we go, but email by far is the best in terms of getting it to me and to Mandy, and then we can get it out to everybody else.
Perfect. Thank you.
So on that one, it sounds like you're still kind of developing the process, but in general, if the emails are going, if they're copied to the assistant, then they'll get put into that doc, and then the answers can be there for everybody else to see what's going on as well. And that way, you get to a board meeting, everybody's seeing the same information. And again, we are not going for perfection. I understand. So
Yeah, I'll just say, I think that's one of the things that this board has done, and thanks to Mandy as well, has been a huge success. I've been really impressed with that. I wish I was more of an advanced processor sometimes, because a lot of times my questions don't come to me from reading the packets. They come when we're discussing them. But
we can't go for perfection. So let's see, were there any other questions on the meetings or topics from the meetings that you were denying to discuss? President?
I wouldn't mind touching on, because I know it's come up in the past, you know, over my years on the board, how we deal with things about the relationships we have with people in the community. It's like sometimes things get touchy. I know it has for me, especially in closed door situations, and how we talk about that or disclose what our relationships might be. And I don't know how I know that there are things when it comes to, you know, Brown Act is one thing, but the other thing is, like, you know, what happens when we're behind those doors? You know, sometimes we're out in front of the public, though, and we're talking about something that involves somebody that we know, or somebody that we hang out with, or somebody that we've had over for Thanksgiving dinner. And how do we deal with those things? And I don't know if we have policy that actually relates to that. I mean, when I've made an effort in the past to disclose those things, and it's never gotten down to the nitty gritty where I've had to say, it's like, all right, I have to step out of the room for this conversation, but it's gotten close. And and it might be over this next year too. It's like, how do we deal with those things too? And I don't think we're there at this very moment, but I would rather we have that discussion before rather than when we're faced with it. Like, how do we do that? How do we talk about that as individuals with the relationships that we're a small town, we're a tiny town. Everybody knows everybody. So what happens when we're sitting there and we're having to decide about something that involves, a decision that impacts somebody that we've had over to our house before, or that maybe not, but just somebody, a teacher that is teaching one of our kids. How do we deal with that? What do we do? And I know that's really broad, but I want to talk about that.
I mean, I'll say quickly, I really do like the idea again for the idea of sharing information. I do think it's good practice to try to be aware of what everybody's coming to the meeting with. And I tend to be an oversharer, so I'd rather say, oh yeah, I once, ran into the person at Safeway. So everyone knows like where it's at. I realize that may take a lot of time too with every issue, but I am a fan of the idea of disclosing is a short answer if it's not problematic in any way.
Are we talking about like conflicts of interest or something that doesn't rise to that level? I'm just trying to figure out like where in the relationship kind of.
I think it's something that could rise to the level of conflict of interest. Sure. Because when, it's like when you think about, it's like, all right, so here's somebody, whether it's, a teacher or somebody admin or your neighbor, and then they've got kids and your kids know your kids. And it's like, it's kind of all conflict of interest at some point. It gets to, it gets murky.
Well, yeah, but I think the question was kind of what's a legal conflict of interest and what's.
I mean, I will say, like we said, we're a small community. We all know a lot of people, but for me, when we sit in this seat, we're putting on our board hat, and that's to be as objectively reasonable as we can, given all of our subconscious bias or whatever we have. But we're supposed to, I guess, take off as much our I'm friends with so-and-so hat and just put on like, I want to look at the facts that are in front of me hat. And yeah, that's kind of how I approach it. I don't know what system, if we need something more specific.
Yeah, I don't know if we need a system
Okay.
or more, something lighter than that, where it's just like, and I'm not going to name names, but I think about when I've been behind the doors before, and it's like, okay, so this is concerning this person. And by the way, I socialize with this person, and making sure that my fellow board members know it's like, yeah, I hang out with this person, and we're not into the nitty gritty yet on this thing, but it's like, I know this person and I might need to step out of the room to disclose those things. It's weird because again, we're in a gray area where it's like, I don't know exactly, but it doesn't involve property that I own or any of that stuff, but it's like, it's weird. It gets to be, for me at least, it gets to be in a kind of a gray area about how do we do that, because it's all impactful. And I don't know how to deal with it. That's why I want to talk about it, because I don't know how to deal with it.
Is it a current issue, Trustee Brian Swanson?
Not presently, but it could be in a week. It could have been 3 weeks ago. It's like and I don't know if it matters that it's a current issue or not. It's more, how do we deal with that? It's like, because it will be at some point an issue for somebody here. The odds are that it will be.
I think it's a personal limit too. You have to know what your personal limit is. Are you capable of making an unbiased decision? That's going to be up to you, right? I mean, we each come with our history and our baggage and all of those things. So it really is just, I feel, a matter of, if you can and if you can't, and you have to be honest with yourself about that, or I have to be honest with myself about that. If I know somebody and something is coming into closed session, and I know truly, honestly, that I cannot be unbiased about it, I have an obligation to say, I have to recuse myself. And there doesn't even need to necessarily be a discussion. It can just be, I cannot make an unbiased decision here, so I'm going to remove myself. And I think that that's okay. But I think that also if we're in closed session, I can only speak for myself. And I feel like, you know what, I can put my board hat on. I can be completely professional about this and make a choice or make a decision that is unbiased, sort of like remove the person and remove the name and just look at it for what it is. And I think that's fine too. But I mean, we only know our own personal limits. And that's my
And I,
opinion.
yeah, and I guess my concern is that subconscious bias, like not anything that would be active, there would be an attempt to like intentionally do that. But I feel like I've been awoken recently to my own subconscious bias on things. And so part of it is just letting the, one option would be to let the other board members know, like, yeah, this is somebody I know, or I have this relationship with them. Like I do this all the time for my job. Like when I'm reviewing a manuscript, like I would say to an editor, hey, I published a paper with this guy 3 years ago. And that way it's like, I know I could still review it favorably, but they may want to then know that. So when I give the review, they can interpret it with that lens. So that would be the question of sharing in my mind, is not from a legal conflict of interest case, but just a like, so we all coming into the room with the same information.
I agree.
Point is coming
I
up.
agree with that. I would agree with that. Yes. But I think it does come down to the personal.
Yeah.
Can you be unbiased?
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean.
Well, I like where both of you are on it. Essentially what you're saying is it's like acknowledging that it's like you can take that hat off and do your job as a board member, but acknowledging that it's like, but this is, I've got this bias that could, potentially come in, and I'm going to set that aside, and acknowledging to everybody that it's like, yeah, but this is where I'm coming from. Right. So and I don't know if we need I guess we don't need a policy other than just being honest with each other about where we're coming from when it's relating to whatever it is that we're being approached with, especially because we're such a small town and everybody knows everybody, to say it's like, all right, I'm not leaving the room on this, but I have a relationship. Or sometimes it's like, you know what, I got to leave the room, or I can't take a vote on this, or whatever it may be. But acknowledging that it's like, we're tiny town USA and we need to deal with these things that we need to deal with.
I guess I would.
Carolyn, your
Sorry,
connection-
William.
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Your connection
can
was
hear.
a little poor.
I think it made it sound like I made a really cool noise that I'm not capable of making. Sorry about that connection sound. Yeah, so I'm a little unclear on where this is coming from, but we do have a policy on conflict of interest. And so I appreciate Clerk McNary's question about, is this a legal question or more just like maybe a comfort level question? But the other reason I'm unclear is because we've had meetings recently in closed session. Like there was one, I don't know when it was, and I said, hey, I know this person individually. Okay, the rest of the board, okay, no problem. We have trustees who recuse themselves from certain items on the agenda. So I don't, if we were gonna spend tonight talking about things that might be an issue in the future, I'm not sure how much we would get done, but I don't know where this is coming from, but we've got policy on it. And if we want to adopt policy further, I'm open to that. That's my comment.
Well, so all I was going to say, and we've kind of gone all over the place tonight, but but that's fine. That's how these tend to go. And honestly, if I had an agenda and you were interested in none of it, that would not be very productive. So we'll go where it takes us. I would just say on this, I mean, even on the legal side, it's such a continuum. If you've ever had the pleasure of having to deal with a legal conflict of interest on the financial side, the regulations are about like this to try to figure out if it's a legal conflict or not. And when it's not legal, it's even worse. So obviously you've got the rules about the legal conflicts. I think really what this comes down to, and even in the legal place, the burden is really on individual trustees to understand if they can be unbiased or not, or if they have a legal issue or not. It's not really on the board, it's really on the individual. So I think what I'm hearing from everybody is it's there, and look, you get elected because you have relationships, really. And so I don't know that's not gonna be a disqualifying factor. And if you feel like you can move forward and you don't have a legal conflict, you wanna let people know, you let people know. If you don't, you don't. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. And so anyway, that was just my two thoughts, but I think that sounded like everybody was kind of on the same page at the end there anyway.
Just
is
quick,
there
I was just
another-
gonna, if I could just say, I mean, President Carroll, what you brought up is exactly the expectation
yeah,
that
yeah.
that
Okay.
we were doing. So thank you.
Okay, setting aside, well, actually, there's 10 minutes, so maybe we should probably start to, does anyone want to start another large topic, what we have? No, but maybe a small one, if there's anything.
I was just gonna ask if anyone had anything they felt unresolved, particularly along those lines.
I wanted to just talk about, not necessarily a specific example, because I don't have one, but I just wanted to make sure when I talk about space to speak and space to have an opinion, especially in closed session, if we're having a discussion, I think it's important to be mindful of body language, to be mindful of facial expression or comments, things like that, because I want to make sure that we are all open with each other and honest with each other, and that there's not, no one's apprehensive, no one's afraid to say anything. I think we're all very appropriate people. There's nobody that's, out there, and so I just want to make sure that when, especially sitting in closed session, that we are all sort of on the same page of being open and aware of each other's need to be heard and need to speak. And that's it. Space to share. That's all.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I think you're right. That, we're, especially when we're in closed session, it's a tiny room. It's like we're right next to each other. And when you talk about facial expressions too, it's very quickly, the mood in the room can change just with one or two people.
Well, and we're talking about sometimes some pretty intense things.
Right? Yes.
And there's a reason it's closed session. And so it's just, some of it is just a matter of respect, but also just sort of a common need to be heard.
I think you're right. And for us to all be aware that it's like, to try and not push our, our thoughts on somebody else. It's like, give space for everybody to speak, and maybe we really pay attention to how we do that and how we rotate that too, so that everybody has an opportunity to really talk about what they're thinking before. And I think we've all been in the room enough now too to know how the temperature can change. And you're like, oh, it's like this is going this way already. So it's like, all right, I'm not even going to talk about that. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really valid, that we need to pay attention to what's happening in that room when we're in there too.
Well, and I think it also gives opportunity for perspective, right? Because I'm coming in with my own idea and opinion and all of that. And and I think just taking the time to really hear what other people are saying, there can be a perspective shift or something you didn't think of before, or, it gives an opportunity for growth and for improvement. And there's just a lot of potential there when we give each other the room to breathe and talk and express.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Anyone else on? No, I think, I was gonna say on that, I think some of that's just good reminders as far as awareness, right? Because those being in closed session, like you said, those become they can be very serious, impactful decisions that you're making, and you're usually, a lot of times you're talking about people, which tends to make it, or individuals, I should say. And I think that's even more of a time to, take a step back and make sure that everyone's getting a chance to say what they have to say and everyone else is listening to what those folks are saying, and not, dismissing it, or, at the end of the day, you may not agree, but everyone and not, I think as far as the body language thing, and we usually talk to boards about this actually in open session, because honestly, by 11 o'clock at night, right, everyone's a little bit zonked, but you're still on TV. And then the parent tunes in because they were interested in their one topic, and you look like you're falling asleep at 11 o'clock. And then you get the email the next morning saying, oh, this board member doesn't pay any attention. It's like, you're trying, but it's hard, right? Because any facial expression, anything that happens up there like that, it gets attributed to you and the board immediately. And so just being hyper vigilant about that stuff is tricky, but I think it goes a long way. Any other things that didn't get resolved or addressed?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
The only thing that I think it was talked about earlier, but I just wanted to solidify, is that looking ahead for other meetings related to special meetings or study sessions, that it sounded like Clerk McNary and Ralph were, I believe, we're gonna maybe put something, collaborate with the CSBA calendar and our existing calendar, especially looking at board goals, strategic plan, and possibly self-evaluation. Is that right?
Are you talking about, just for clarification, are you talking about something new that is coming out of this meeting, or can you?
Yes. Yeah, was that something that came out of this meeting? And is that even okay for something like that to come out of this meeting, for us to direct staff to, and maybe one trustee to get some more study sessions on the calendar? Should we talk about that at our next regular meeting?
Would that be under future agenda, or more meetings would we need to discuss it?
I would imagine we could bring that up at future agendas or during the board calendar item at the next meeting would
Okay.
probably be appropriate.
So just
Okay, so
something-
it wasn't decided on here. It was just one of the topics of discussion. Okay, great. I'll bring it up at the next regular meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a note of it as well. And I guess on that same vein, if we are going to want to get into like study sessions for new projects or big things like, restructuring, it may require more meetings. So just something for all of us to be aware, because like we all said, we've got enough to do on a Thursday night from, 5 PM to 10 PM or sometimes later. And then it's a bummer when we don't get to the things that are actually like what we want to hear about, the awesome PE presentation or how the tech team is doing, which is why we're all here, to hear about the awesome things going on in the district. So it may end up being that more meetings allows us to finish earlier and to get through more of the exciting new future kind of projects that we're looking at. And we can always put it on the calendar and cancel it if there's nothing on the agenda. So that's my pitch for more meetings. Or not really, but just if it needs to happen, if it benefits the students, we should consider it.
And the only thing I would add to that, I think where I've seen those be the most effective is not whether you it's really easy to turn those into overflow meetings.
Okay.
So if you're gonna, if it's gonna be a study session for strategy or goals, or trying to keep that protected from, well, we've got a heavy agenda the week before, so maybe we'll just push a couple items onto
Okay.
that, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of having that time to talk about that one big issue. I think, like, even what we're doing here today, I think a lot more effective than when you try to do, it in 20-minute chunks while you're also doing a regular meeting. So, kind of creating a space just for that. And the other thing is, it also turns it's the lanes on the freeway issue, which you keep adding them and you fill them up no matter what. So
Okay.
really trying to protect that space, I think is a good, or that time is a good idea.
I think that makes sense. Okay, it's 5:57. Are we wrapping up? Board, any final comments? None. Any public comment before we close out?
I have a
Oh, I'm
quick
sorry.
comment. It's okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I
Trustee
just
Otmar.
wanted to say I really enjoyed this. It was nice to be able to talk to you guys. Like, because we don't do this, and it just felt really good to communicate and all be together and be able to chat. This is
I agree.
it's nice. I'd like to do this again.
Yay.
Yeah.
Trustee
Agreed.
President Carolyn, anything from you as a final thought?
I agree with Laura, and I really thank everybody for this Friday afternoon, including staff members, William Tunick for driving here, all that. It's good. I think it's really healthy for our whole board, so thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really great first step for us to be diving into this together. So I hope there will be more. Thank you, William Tunick, for all of your efforts to get us set up and to digest all the information we sent you and prepare a really productive meeting. I feel like we've got some good steps to take to.
And if I may,
Yeah, sure.
I also want to extend my congratulations. Great job. These are just difficult meetings to have.
Yeah.
I totally know that, and watching them come and go over the years, and just want to extend my congratulations. You guys did a great job. I appreciate the conversation too. Helps us as staff to kind of understand the relationships more. So.
Thank you, Dr. Forrest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing? Can I say
Sure.
one more thing? About William Tunick? I had sent him some recordings of the meetings so that he could get a feel for all, for us. And he watched those right away and did a lot of pre-work for this.
Mhm.
So, thank you.
What I do in my free time is I watch board. But actually, no,
was
I think I
impressed.
did tell the board
Oh.
president this. It is actually has made this part, having Zoom and recorded meetings has made our lives a lot easier because we can now go actually see what happens in board meetings instead of getting the, the Reader Digest version from someone the next morning. So no, but it was, and thank you for inviting me and letting me kind of join your group for today. I hope it was helpful. I know these things, as Superintendent said, they can be a little unwieldy, but hopefully we got some productive pieces out of it. And I will follow up with a little bit of a summary, and hopefully that can help with some next steps as well.
Sounds great. Okay. With that, we will adjourn.